This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, I think, is on sabbatical. Nathan Hager scheduled to be with us in a moment. It was a very short straw. He pulled the short straw this morning. Hager exhausted after an extraordinary Bloomberg daybreak. I've been writing a book. It's coming out, Surveillance Elegy. We're looking forward to that. There is politics in the nation in Milwaukee. We'll go to Lord Davidson in a moment, but Paul and I this morning, folks, we are focused on earnings, on the market as well. Bank of America just out, and we're looking for Morgan Stanley as well. I'd say all in all, a constructive bank. Paul, explain this to our audience here. Some quarters trading works, some quarters it doesn't, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it looks like, just reading across some of the Goldman numbers, the Bank of America numbers, JP Morgan, the traders are having a kind of the upper hand here in this business environment vis-a-vis the bankers. But the bankers, for their part, are saying their pipelines are looking improved, looking better in terms of underwriting and advisory work. So
it's
generally some positive.
Solid. Yeah, I mean, that's the word everybody uses here now. Is solid. What we don't have is a solid bond market. David Rubenstein moving the market yesterday with Jerome Powell, he of the Federal Reserve System. And I really, I'm as distracted as anybody else about the horrific assassination attempt and all. And forget about the spread market. Bond levels are moving. That's the key message this morning. And for global Wall Street, I've got a Paul Sweeney 4.42%. On the 2-year, and the 10-year yield is stunning, 4.18%. And the 10-year real yield gives way to just under 1.90%. Wow. Paul, this is on a relative basis, but critically an absolute basis. Price higher, yield lower.
Exactly right, Tom. And we've had some big moves. You mentioned that 2-year Treasury, again, at 4.42%. Tom, we were at 5%, 5.02%, just around in the late April timeframe. So a big pullback here in yields. The Federal Reserve maybe has room to move here. That's what the bond market's telling
Do you know what Nathan Hager has?
Oh, boy.
They have the best food court in the world.
They do.
I used to say Tokyo was the best.
Okay.
But Nathan, that's why, he's well-fed, to say the least. And from the Interactive Broker Studios and from Washington, D.C., with our Bloomberg Business Flash, the star of Bloomberg Daybreak, going long, Nathan Hager.
Be gentle. I'll save a toffee bar. Good morning, Tom. You're talking about the Treasury situation here. Looking at Treasuries, they are seeing a big rise in the pre-market with the 10-year near its lowest level.
We got a technical problem there. That's the Hager robot. We'll get back to him. We'll rewire up with Washington as we can. We had a doubling of Nathan Hager, which is, just Nathan Hager alone is tough to
Nathan
take.
Hager 1 is fine.
Doubling is just too much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges and no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. Red and green on the screen. I want to go to the real yield here. There's a range that's been on the 10-year real yield, and it's roughly 2.05%, roughly up to 2.15%. And we've been pounding on that support at 205, 204. Maybe you go to 2.00. Paul, there's been little breaths where we've broken down, but I would say on this Tuesday morning, there's something decisive here. I'm editorializing. 1.8945, without question, I could say, on the precipice of signaling disinflation.
Absolutely, Tom. And again, just going across the yield curve, the 2-year Treasury is off 4 basis points, 4.42%. The 10-year Treasury off 5 basis points, 4.17%. So big pullback in yields really over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks as the equity market has moved higher here. So now the economic data for a lot of folks is saying the Fed, in fact, can begin to cut rates. The question is September or maybe December.
We continue our coverage of the RNC convention in Milwaukee. Joining us too early in her morning, Laura Davidson of Bloomberg News. I say this with immense respect in the trenches of the news flow. Laura, what will the day two story be on JD Vance, on Senator Vance? There's always, the first story, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But you're so good at what's the second day story on the senator from Ohio?
So people are really starting to now just dig into, what does this guy stand for? He doesn't fit neatly in sort of, the party of Ronald Reagan, for example. He's much more skeptical of, being involved in international engagements. He would like to get out of the war in Ukraine. He's not an interventionalist at all. He's also very much against big tech. He's introduced a bunch of bills, but he's also pro-crypto, and he is, pro-tax cuts. And so it's a weird mix of pro-business and anti-business.
Yeah, you nail it with the phrase weird mix. Can I just ask a rhetorical question, not to get L. Davidson in trouble? Why is he anti-big tech when a big tech guy wrote the check to get him elected senator of Ohio?
This is a real good question, and where you sometimes see that donor interests don't totally align with politician interests. Donors frequently talk about you get to back the candidates you have, not some candidate you'd like to build in a lab that has a perfect on every issue. Ken Griffin is someone who talks about this all the time of looking at the candidates for House. He is a major donor. But this is the tension we're about to see play out, and particularly in Silicon Valley, while he represents their interest in some regards, there's also starting to be a low-level freakout about what this Meta and Amazon.
Am I watching the sequel to Robert Redford and the Candidate? I mean, Laura, I know you watched it when you were in 7th grade. You've seen the movie 15 times, but Bob Redford, just as you say, they're making a candidate. They're manufacturing a candidate. Was J.D. Vance manufactured? I say that respect for his military service and his Yale Law academics. Was he manufactured?
He is similar, so to someone in Democratic politics, Pete Buttigieg, another young, up-and-coming rising star there, of someone who, clearly from a young age, was thinking about, how do I sort of build a resume that, kind of checks a bunch of different boxes. So, he comes from this, working class upbringing, writes a best-selling book, goes to Yale Law School, and then, at age 39, is selected to be a vice presidential candidate. So this is very similar to what we saw with Buttigieg, just 4 years ago.
Laura, what's the expected role for President Donald Trump tonight and over the next couple of days? We saw his entrance yesterday, a lot of fanfare, the bandage on his ear from Saturday. What's the expected role over the next day or two or three?
So he will likely lay low for the next day or two, in the lead up to his big speech on Thursday. Tonight, one of the big things that we're watching is Nikki Haley. Of course, bitter primary rival to Trump, is expected to speak. This was sort of a last minute addition to the schedule. She wasn't in the preliminary list that went out last week, but post the shooting, Trump called her and said, "Hey, look, I'd like to come. You would be a signal of unity of the entire party." But it'll be interesting in the room to see how she's received. Even last night, folks like David Sachs on the stage, nobody knew who he was, and he didn't get that great of a reception. Also, when Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters, spoke, he got some boos at times.
This is the first thing that went through my head this morning. They go, "We have Davison on," and I said, "Oh my God, I got to ask smart questions." Laura, on the floor, how many people are diehard Trump, and how many people? And I say this, folks, I don't need hate mail. I get the hate mail. Sweeney gets the love notes. Actually, Lisa gets the love notes.
Always.
But Laura, to be perfectly honest, what percentage of the people on the floor are what I'm going to call traditional Mitch McConnell Republicans?
Without taking a formal poll, but just kind of seeing, who's wearing a MAGA hat, who is kind of there out in full force. This is Trump's party now. And literally.
Oh, come on. You got to give me a number. Come on, Laura. It's too early in the morning. You haven't had your Sanka. What is it? 80% MAGA?
That's not a bad number. I'll tell you, it's not quite as fervent a crowd as when you go to a Trump rally and everyone is just
sure, of course.
Trump's face all over it. It's not quite that. You still, but it is very close. Everyone is there, to support Trump. These are the people who wanted to come to this event.
Paul, she went to bed at 2 a.m. Have you ever seen her this awake at 7:09 a.m. Eastern time? She's killing it. One more, please.
So, Laura, what's the expected role for this newly named vice presidential candidate, Mr. Vance. What do we expect from him over the next couple of days?
So his big speech will be on Wednesday night. That'll be, his big keynote. Vance is a very practiced public speaker. One of the reasons that Trump, picked him and was drawn to him is that he's a very good on TV. He's very ardent defender of the president. So expect to see a big, full-throated, perhaps, angry, a little bit dark speech on Wednesday from him. We'll see if that, if he, kind of sticks with this message of unity that Republicans are at least talking about. But that will be the highlight from him over the next 2 days.
Laura, get the surveillance nap in. We'll let you decide. Michael Barr, Laura Davison she deserves a surveillance nap today.
Laura Davison is the greatest.
She's the greatest. Right.
Yes.
She deserves a surveillance nap. 15 hours, 18 hours a day at the Republican National Convention. Laura Davison reporting from Milwaukee. Laura, thank you as well. Red and green on the screen with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom and Paul. Day one of the Republican National Convention is in the books, with delegates officially stamping the names of Donald Trump and JD Vance on top of the party's November ticket. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson says his Monday night convention speech in Milwaukee was the wrong one. Johnson blaming the teleprompters for loading an old speech while his party is currently trying to push a message of unity. Johnson instead gave the speech that he says was written last week.
Today's Democrat agenda, their policies, are a clear and present danger to America, to our institutions, our values, and our people.
Meanwhile, JD Vance will give a speech tomorrow night. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg Tom.
Can I give you some Tang Zero?
Just give me the zero.
There? This happens, folks. I'm gonna blame it. Michael Barr's falling apart. Sweeney's falling apart.
Yeah.
I'm falling apart. It's the air conditioning.
Oh, it's
I'm
an
sorry.
icebox in here.
We go from, this is wonderful in here. We have the nicest radio studio on the planet. This is the Grower studio, is what we call
it is. Exactly.
But you okay over there? Okay. Get the emergency Sanka out, please, right away. But I'm sorry, in our modern day and age, it was 86 when I woke up this morning in New York. And then we go into hermetically sealed 68 degrees, and the cars got they're blowing on my face. The new AC is ridiculous.
It is. It's cranking in here, so it's all good. You got to keep the equipment nice and cool, and that's what I've been told. So that's,
do you have AC at the beach?
We do, and we needed it actually last night, which is rare. Probably 5-6 nights a year we'll use AC because you get the water's still nice and cool, so you get the breeze off the water. It's all good.
Okay,
Beautiful day at the beach yesterday.
We'll have to see. Let's go back to the bond market. I think this is important. For Global Wall Street, you got Morgan Stanley. When do we expect them? 7:30?
Yeah, I don't know when. They just kind of stroll in here. Bank of America was already out.
They've all been early.
Everybody on the Morgan Stanley trading desk is up and at it. They're making calls to their clients. They're moving some markets around, but I haven't heard from them.
PIMCO hires Kawai from Morgan Stanley MUFG for Japan Macro. That's the only headline.
Okay.
I have. Can we remember when MUFG of Tokyo wrote
crisis.
the check to save Morgan Stanley?
Yep. That was a big deal. They were scouring for cash.
Yeah.
And they all were that, over 4 or 5 days, all the big banks. And John Mack landed that deal.
I was honored to speak to John Mack about this transaction at Davos once, and we send our greetings to Mr. Mack this morning. Futures up 8, possibly. We'll speak to Michael Barr. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, I'm Nathan Hager. This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing. Call an Oppenheimer professional today. Treasury yields are down to their lowest levels since March. Traders are putting faith in the idea that the Fed can start cutting in September. Check markets all day long on Bloomberg. Right now, the 10-year is at 4.17%, a drop of more than 5 basis points. 2-year, 4.41. As for futures, they're starting to firm up just a bit. S&P futures up 0.1%. NASDAQ futures up 0.25%. Dow futures, little change, though, to the upside. Looking at NYMEX crude, it's down 1.4%. It's
pretty good.
Trading at $80.79 per barrel. COMEX gold's trading close to a record, though, of 0.6%, $24.44.10 per ounce. We did get earnings from Bank of America. Net interest income missed, but the bank is guiding for an increase by the end of the year and also reported a big dividend push for investors. Bank of America shares right now higher by 2.5%. We are awaiting results in minutes from Morgan Stanley. It's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Nathan Hager, thanks so much. On YouTube, if you can see young Hager there, it's a rock star office. It's the closest office at radio to the food court.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah,
very good.
Yeah, he insisted on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Had a star tantrum and said, get me near the food court. Nathan Hager, thank you so much. The star of Bloomberg Daybreak. It's a really good compendium. It's a very different show than Bloomberg Surveillance. It's a really good compendium of getting your day started. He does a great job on that. Joining us now, Amy Wu Silverman with RBC Capital Markets. Amy, there's a right tail in the distribution, the risk that we measure, which is the goodness of a story. There's a left tail, which is the angst. What does the left tail of NVIDIA look like?
Tom, it may be the only question. So the answer is the left tail isn't really up all that much. You know, you're not having that much worry, but importantly, the right tail has come in a lot. So I think that's a big deal in a name where the right tail has actually been outweighing the left tail. That's very unusual, except for a name like NVIDIA. So for that right tail, that exuberance to have come in so much, I think that's important, and we'll see how that moves as we head into earnings.
As we head into earnings, for you as a legit quant, what part of fundamental earnings matters to a quant?
You know, I always go back, Tom, to the variance of a portfolio. It's like my favorite pet formula right now because it always goes back to the breadth, the weight of the market. And we kind of know that when you look at the math, the weight of tech matters so much, right? We can talk about broadening, we can talk about all these things, but it's still those 7 names that make the majority of the contribution of returns. So again, I'm watching earnings of the Mag 7, I'm watching earnings of NVIDIA. Yeah. And when you start to see that right tail get sucked in as we head into earnings, you know, I don't know how great a sign that is.
And Paul, that's where mere mortals like us talk about absolute and relative. And the media loves to talk about relative analysis. And what Amy Wu Silverman's saying brilliantly is the absolute mass and weight of tech is just ginormous. That she learned that at Princeton. Ginormous.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. And so, Amy, as Tom was just saying here, it seems like this whole earnings season really hangs on a handful of stocks and really their forecasts. Because when and if this AI momentum breaks, that could be a problem not just for the individual stocks, but for the market overall. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, you know, look, I've kept saying to our clients, if tech goes, the market goes. And we've actually seen that a few days. So when we talk to investors, they say, look, we can't wait for the market to broaden. You know, we can't wait for maybe IWM to outperform S&P. The thing is, when you see that happen in the past on certain days, you actually are getting a down days in the S&P or the Dow, because again, it comes down to that weight. You could have a healthy broadening of the market, but if tech isn't playing nicely, the overall market is still not going to be doing well. well. And so, we're looking at hedges there. We're looking at something like collars where you sell a little bit of upside, own a little bit of downside. I think that's relatively inexpensive right now because all options are really inexpensive, and you continue to have your headline VIX sub 13 even with everything going on.
Why are options inexpensive? Explain how that market works to us.
Yeah, I've been calling this market the paddling duck market. I haven't been able to find a better analogy, so let me know. But look, it's calm on the surface, right? But those feet are paddling really, really violently underneath. You get these rotation days. I think last Thursday was a good example. You had one of the most historic IWM to S&P rotations on record, flips the next day, and you keep seeing that. But when they cancel each other out, you don't see it on that index volatility level. So right now, average single stock volatility compared to index volatility is at its highest spread ever. It's a really big deal, but you just cannot see it when you just look at the VIX alone.
We're coming in, when you think about, at least from my perspective, my experience, September and October, rough times for the equity markets. What's the risk for this market heading into the fall, heading into, again, this concentration risk in these tech names?
I've been thinking about that a lot, and it's interesting because we are heading into U.S. elections. And when you look historically, the market does tend to rally into U.S. elections. And, one stat that I just think is super interesting, after the first presidential debate, the implied volatility on actual election day actually went down. It compressed, essentially the market saying that there's a more definitive likely winner to the presidential election. The thing is, when you also look to history, there's a lot of surprises and a lot of runway between now and U.S. elections, especially when you look seasonally at VIX. VIX tends to spike. So I think, again, things are inexpensive. You can be the boy who cried wolf, but you do need that exogenous shock to the market to change things.
Amy, one final question. I look at the option space and the derivatives analysis, and the heart of the matter is we've got this polarity between capital-heavy industrial America and technology capital-light America. What does derivative space say about the potential long winning of capital-light technology? What does it say about we just don't need that much money, we've got innovation, we've got people?
Yeah, it's interesting because we track this in two different ways, Tom. We kind of track this through two different kinds of baskets, high quality basket versus low quality basket, which tends to be tech against everything else. But we actually track it against Trump basket versus Biden basket, which also tends to be one heavy industrials, one not. And when you look at the pricing overall, there's just not that much differentiation right now. And one of the reasons, Tom, is just everything's really low. And again, I think that differentiation probably needs to happen as we head towards elections and different political themes.
Amy Wu Silverman, thank you so much. RBC Capital Markets this morning on the earnings season to come here. When do we get earnings? Like I think Friday we finally get a little bit of techie earnings and big techie earnings as well. We're filling in some slots here this morning. We always leave a couple slots open, and we're really focused here for those of you in the stock market on yield. Yield has changed this morning. It changed with Jerome Powell yesterday. A new persistency of a lower inflation-adjusted yield, the real yield at the 10-year duration. You wonder what mortgages do here. I mean, do we crack 7.00?
Yeah, I mean, I would think you would. I would think you'd be down there in the high sixes somewhere. But, I'm not sure where the level is in the mortgage market where an owner of a home says, okay, I'm willing to sell my home to go into a new home and deal with that higher mortgage rate. I don't know if it's 6%, if it's 5%. What's the clearing rate for a lot of these homeowners to say, all right, I'm ready to put my home on the market? Because right now it's just been new construction. Yeah,
one of my most famous charts, folks, and we're not going to show it on YouTube, or it doesn't look good on Bloomberg Radio either. Good morning, Bloomberg 1130, is from the Thursday of August of the Great Financial Crisis, 2007. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big banks. And I will describe for you the victory of JP Morgan, far and away superior return. And the next one may surprise people. Goldman Sachs.
Sure.
Over those, now becoming almost 20 years. Yeah. Not bad. And then paired together is Wells Fargo and Morgan Stanley, where we'll see earnings. And shockingly behind, really not, I didn't realize the underperformance, then the recovery of the Moynihan recovery of Bank of America and Citigroup non-existent. Brian Moynihan in the 2 o'clock hour this afternoon, a conversation across all of Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, I'm Nathan Hager as we wait for earnings from Morgan Stanley to cross the Bloomberg terminal any moment now. We continue to watch shares of Bank of America. They've already reported earnings saying net interest income should rise in the fourth quarter. That's bringing Bank of America shares on the rise by more than 2% in early trading. Futures mainly mixed. S&P futures up 0.1% or 7 points. Dow futures little change, down 10 points. NASDAQ futures up 0.2% or 42 points. 10-year Treasury up 14/32. The yield down to 4.17%. The 2 years at 4.41. NYMEX crude's down 1.5% to $80.67 per barrel. And COMEX gold up 0.7% at $24.4540 an ounce. Here come those earnings from Morgan Stanley. Second quarter net revenue beat the average analyst estimate, and net interest income looks like a beat there as well. Pretty sizable beat of $2.07 billion. The estimate was $1.78. It's a Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
Nathan, thanks so much. We have a really esteemed guest here. We're going to go over Morgan Stanley very quickly. And Paul, I think it's easy to do. Like a lot of others, they're doing really well. The word I'm seeing up $2 is solid.
Yeah, exactly right. The stock is up a little over 1% in pre-market trading here. I look at the FIC business, fixed income, commodities, currencies. That's a big trading operation for a lot of these big banks. Revenue came in at $2 billion. The estimate was $1.86 billion. So wealth management came a little bit light here, but generally overall, stock up about 1% to 2% here.
The usual of course, this is a non-Gorman report, we should say.
Right, exactly. Good point.
This is after Gorman, but you go to wealth management where Mr. Gorman changed American asset management, and there the margin. This is the Gorman statistic. Wealth management pre-tax margin, 26.8%.
Yep.
Joining us now, somebody who has these concepts really tattooed to his brain with no exception, our good friend Andreas Uterman. He's with Vontobel, chairman of their board of directors after a 10 years tour duty at Allianz Global. A 26% pre-tax margin. Do they do that in Europe?
Yes, they do that, particularly in Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland has a very healthy financial services sector, and the private banks are doing very well.
I want to talk to you about, forget about Bitcoin and all that, but the shift,
I hope so.
The shift from mutual funds to ETFs is a margin shrinker. Everybody's struggling, I'll say particularly away from the Swiss at the United Kingdom. There's some huge active management struggles. You're the single best guy I know to answer this question. Where are we in active management in 5 years?
I think it needs to be differentiated. There are strategies that lend themselves better than others to really active management. I would count most of the fixed income space in that. As you know, fixed income mandates have suffered much less from the competition from ETFs. But I would also say that many active equity strategies, if managed right and with the right level of active risk within them, and wrapped in the right wrapper, for example, active ETFs will be around in 5 years' time.
But the cliche, which I happen to believe in, is the way active management shines is they do better in down markets. Is it just simply we have not had a global drawdown in equities to readjust the active management index fund differential?
I mean, that's partly true. I think the other thing I would point to is that the increased concentration in markets, particularly in the US, in the Magnificent Seven and the like, means that it's very, very difficult for active asset managers to be overweight those stocks as a group. And that's really a challenge. And until that reverses, it'll be more difficult for active managers in the equity space to outperform, certainly large caps.
How do you think about global allocation from your perspective? US, Europe, Asia, where are you guys these days?
I don't think there is one right answer for this. I think it depends entirely on the starting position of the person who's looking to invest. I always start personally is what's your base currency, and if your base currency is in dollars, then that's your reference currency. If it's euros, that's euros, and if it's sterling, that's sterling, and then you diversify away from that. And so the answer might very well be different from region to region and even asset class to asset class. But I mean, it goes without saying that, for instance, now that the fixed income markets give you some yield again for the first time for the last 18 months in almost a generation, people would be well advised, in my opinion, to go a little bit longer, for example, to add some duration to their portfolios, not stick just to cash.
Certainly here in the U.S., the ETF phenomena has been just extraordinary in terms of where the incremental investment dollars are going. I grew up in a business that was driven by the Boston mutual funds, for example, the T. Rowe Prices of the world. Talk to us about what you see from your perspective in Switzerland about the ETF phenomenon. Is it different in Europe than it is in the US?
No, I think it's global. I think it's important to differentiate between passive and active ETFs. I think broadly speaking, you're right that ETFs overall have made it very difficult for active managers, as I mentioned earlier, particularly in the equity space. But of course, the fastest growing category, I believe, in the ETF space is active ETFs. Yeah. So that goes to show that there continues to be demand for active management. It just needs to be in the right wrapper at the right price point.
To me, that just, when I understand the ETFs, passive, index, all that, I got that. And then people started talking about active ETFs. I said, wait a minute, that's an oxymoron, active ETFs. But at some point, it's just all about price. I don't care what the wrapper is. It's all about price, whether you call it a mutual fund or an ETF. I know there's some tax differentiation.
Well, that's crucial, though. I mean, that's part of the attraction over mutual funds of active ETFs. But I think, yes, you're right. It's about price. And once active managers have found the right price point for each strategy, it'll be tougher for passive ETFs to compete with that.
The blue button, the Detroit Lions blue button. Andreas, in your academics, you had the honor of studying under Paul DeGuar, who's been a great, great friend of the show. And I could go into a fiscal discussion now, but I think we should stay on global at Wall Street. Part of academic excellence is the path that you go get a CFA. But a CFA isn't running an index fund. A CFA is about active management. Can you tell a young Turk out of Munich with Allianz or out of Zurich with your shop, Vontobel, to go get a CFA now? What's the future here for CFAs in securities selection?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, you've got a CFA, I believe.
It's a rumor.
And so do I. So we certainly believe that that's the right way to go. I think the CFA is more than about stock picking, isn't it? It's about partly it's about signing up every year to a code of conduct, which is really important in our industry. Without trust, we don't have a business. The financial services will suffer from a lack of trust. So the CFA curriculum teaches you about that, teaches you about how to act properly in financial markets, but it also teaches you about discounted cash flows and all the other very, very important financial concepts that we need to assess whether an investment makes sense and capital allocation goes in the right direction.
Do you see mergers coming? I mean, the great equity asset management roll-up, it will just simply continue?
I think it'll continue both in the asset management space as well as the private wealth management space. I mean, the two obviously sometimes get conflagrated, but I think in the private wealth management space, the consolidation is going to be even quicker, if you ask me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Switzerland. Talk to us about the economy in Switzerland. How is the economy there?
Economy is doing really well. I think part of the reason is that the level of trust by corporations that operate in Switzerland in terms of the institutional stability of the country is very, very high. Foreign direct investment into Switzerland knows that as well. It's one of the few countries in the world that is really stable from an institutional framework perspective. Interestingly, and that's really to the great credit of many Swiss corporations, the strength of the Swiss franc, which is multi-decade long and continues, is being absorbed by increasing productivity by many Swiss corporations, and that means that they can continue to export sufficiently.
I mean this in a positive way. Can that shell game continue? I mean, SMB gets massive credit for the money just coming in. It's just overwhelming, the success of Switzerland. But can that process that's been successful with increased productivity, can it continue?
I think it can. I think it's about transparency, which Switzerland has achieved. It's about institutional stability, which in an increasingly fragmented world, I think is one of the, we talk about safe havens. Certainly Switzerland is one of the world's most safe havens countries.
We're just trying to get a remote out of Zurich.
Yes,
I mean, that's all.
You're welcome to visit any time.
Do that in ski season. Real quickly, the UBS, Credit Suisse, I know the Swiss were...
He doesn't want to talk about that, Paul.
Definitely concerned about the loss of this great institution, Credit Suisse.
Oh, listen to you.
What's the view these days?
I beg your pardon?
What's the view these days about this merger? Is it, in hindsight, the right thing that had to be done?
I think it had to be done. I think Coleman and Sergio were the right people to manage this integration. You saw it as soon as Coleman announced that Sergio was taking over, the share price went up significantly. So, as we said earlier, it's all about trust in financial markets.
I can see Michael Barr doing the news in front of Brasserie Lip in Zurich. Lovely, late summer day, early autumn day. It'd be great.
I like that, man.
Michael Barr, a cup of coffee at Brasserie Lip is like $8.
Well, then I can't see that.
$8.
It's Switzerland.
You're getting a discount.
Exactly. Andreas Silverman, thank you so much from Zurich, and we greatly appreciate his attendance. today. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Nathan. The Republican National Convention resumes today with a focus on immigration. Last night, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem rallying the crowd at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, calling Donald Trump the toughest man she knows, referencing how he cheated death over the weekend, just barely avoiding an assassin's bullet.
But even in the most perilous moment this week, his instinct was to stand and to fight.
Trump named JD Vance as his running mate. Too many federal and state court judges choose not to recuse themselves from cases despite at least appearances of conflicts of interest. That's according to the investigative nonprofit ProPublica Group. College students examined more than 1,000 judges and found that some of them had close family or financial ties to groups appearing before them in court and should have considered stepping aside or disclosing possible conflicts but did not. Gabe Roth with Fix the Court, they're calling for change.
The current ethics rules don't cut it because I think there's just a lack of transparency regarding the work of a judicial spouse.
Gabe Roth with Fix the Court, he says that it's a real disservice to the transparency and accountability of the judiciary. Teoscar Hernandez won last night's Home Run Derby in Arlington, Texas, aired on ESPN, but the crowd paid attention to a different kind of pitch last night. Four-time Grammy-nominated country music star Ingrid Andress became the latest singer to struggle with the national anthem.
And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
Where was that?
That was Arlington, Texas.
Oh, boy.
Critics, oh dear, they flooded the singer's social media account with memes reacting to the star's spangled spectacle. Comments on her Instagram account later disabled. Hey, stuff happens, you know? Global news. 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
He's cruel. I mean, it's cruel and unusual Michael Barr punishment. I guess, Michael Barr, thank you for that. Let's go over to equities, Paul. It's like day after day. Levels on the close. 40,200, 5,600, with trying to get to 57. We're not there. 5,600. And I don't think we make enough about the NASDAQ 100 resilient at 20,000, 20,300. It's not a number in our head, but it is this great bull market.
Yeah, so it's just we've seen these daily highs here, all-time highs for these markets here. And this is on the expectation of that the Fed will begin cutting rates, number one. Number two.
That's a big shift.
That's a big shift. And number two, generally solid earnings.
Yeah.
I mean, high single digit, maybe 10% earnings growth this quarter. And for the bulls, those two things, you put those together, and that's a constructive market.
Chris Giles over at the FT, his title today, "'Tis the Season to be Happy About U.S. Inflation."
Okay.
And that's what you get off the Jerome Powell, David Rubenstein conversation yesterday. Futures up 7, Dow futures up 16, the VIX 13.27. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, I'm Nathan Hager, continuing to watch bank earnings. We'll call it financial earnings now, really. We'll mention Charles Schwab since that crossed on the Bloomberg terminal. Adjusted earnings per share beat the average analyst estimate, but net interest revenue missed, and Schwab reported fewer clients opening new brokerage accounts than analysts expected. Schwab shares down more than 3% now in the pre-market. Morgan Stanley's been swinging between gains and losses. The Wall Street giant reported a wealth management net revenue miss. Morgan Stanley shares now down about 2%. Bank of America is still higher by more than 2%. The bank is guiding for an increase in net interest income by the fourth quarter. As for the broader market, futures pointing to modest gains, with S&P futures up 1/10% or 7 points. Dow futures little changed at 17 points higher. NASDAQ futures up 41 points. That's a gain of 0.2%. 10-year treasuries up 14 30-seconds, yield down to 4.17%. NYMEX crude's down 1 2/3% now at $80.55 a barrel, and COMEX gold at $24.4350 per ounce. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
And Nathan, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace. Access our vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities, no markups, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. ibkr.com/bonds. For those of you of the football persuasion, hugely followed, Gareth Southgate is out at England. We will effort John Farrell for the 9. We'll talk to his people and my people, see if we can get him. Gary Lineker says, wishing Gareth Southgate all the very best in the future. He brought pride, respect, and togetherness to England. It's hugely, I'm not up to speed on this, Paul.
No, but I thought England had a great run in the Euros.
Great run, came that close. Right now, if they had beat Spain, I think they'd be looking at the House of Lords.
Right.
But there he is. Gareth Southgate moves on. And we'll have more across all of our London coverage on that here in a bit. Joining us right now, Anurag Rana of Bloomberg Intelligence, I guess on the tech season to come. Anurag, how about an open question? Do they match revenue excellence? Do they match free cash flow growth excellence?
As far as the revenue growth expectations, I think they will meet them. But the big question is going to be with what kind of guidance they would give for the next 6 months, because right now we are still in very uncharted territories when it comes to tech spending, and also the political climate, both on the war in the Middle East and the presidential election. I think because of that, you may see some muted guidance for the next 6 months.
And, Anurag, when you think about some of these big tech names, we've been talking to a lot of fund managers and strategists about the concentration risk in the stock market with some of the big tech names that you follow, whether it's NVIDIA or Microsoft or whatever. When you talk to people who actually own these stocks in size, are they hedging against some of this huge performance they've just had and the downside risk? Are they just kind of all in? Are they taking some money off the table? What are the big investors in these names? What are they thinking these days?
See, I think in the last 1 week, we saw a little bit of rotation out of these large cap into small cap, but that's driven by the interest rate concept. And then I think that's really what's driving at this point. Otherwise, when you look at it, it's kind of clear in terms of that if you see a big surge in spending because of AI over the next few years, it is going to be concentrated on the larger names just because of the view, the way they have either the chips or the infrastructure or the applications that go with it. So it is concentrated on the revenue side, but I think we are seeing a different dynamics, which I don't think it's tied to tech spending.
So Anurag, let's look at Apple here. There was the stocks had this nice kind of, just in a 40% move really just in the last couple of months here to the upside. And the story that really got my attention yesterday was about India. And Apple's India sales surged 33% to a record in a shift from China. This is something that you've been talking about a long time, that potentially India can replace to some degree China as a growth driver. What's going on with Apple in India?
Yeah, so if you look at it in terms of the total addressable market, China has over 1 billion smartphones. India has about over 600 million smartphones. But Apple's share of those 600 million smartphones is very small. It's roughly only about 4%. Whereas when you compare to China, China has about 20% share of iOS compared to its 1 billion smartphones. So that's 200 million smartphones. But in India, it's only about 25 million. So 1:8 ratio. As India becomes more affluent, as the middle class becomes richer, Apple is one place they will be going to, get their new smartphones.
Anurag, I want to go back to your idea of guidance, and there may be a softness to the view forward of the Magnificent Seven. I just took a quarterly semi-log chart of the Magnificent Seven index on the Bloomberg, and I'm sorry, and folks, this is arbitrary, but my decline down to support, because they've moved so much, is well in excess of a decline of 40%. Could we have a bloodbath here over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks just because guidance misses the mark and we go into a massive sale of these extended stocks?
Yeah, so we did publish a note just talking about it because we looked at a detailed analysis of the top 50 software companies. The top 50 software companies are trading 11% above their pre-pandemic averages. But when you look at the bottom 100, the smaller or the mid-cap names, they are completely demolished. The growth rates for those companies, I think it's those companies, if we see a recovery because of lower interest rates, it's those companies that will see potentially better revenue growth and their valuations far better than the top 50.
But if we have a misstep, this is riveted to all of our listeners and viewers. Pick the stock. If we have a misstep in the Magnificent Seven, how far down is the Anurag Rana down?
Yeah, I think the bottom, and it's going to be tough to figure out as to whether it's 5% then or higher than that. But one of the things is very clear. There are two elements of it. One is fundamental, which is they're not going to surprise ups on the revenue upside as much as they have done in the past. So it's all a matter of expectations. They're still going to grow good numbers. But the second part also is, as we discussed, is the pivot from the large cap to the small caps. I think both those elements are against the large cap tech names as we go into the earnings season.
All right, so Anurag, we sit back here. It's all AI all the time. What's the name that you're most positive on in terms of playing this trend here?
I think the one that never gets talked about is really Amazon. And we have seen a fair amount of, I would say, back investor optimism in terms of the prospects of this company. When we look at Amazon, there is still a long way to go when it comes to profit performance of the company. And also, this is one name that is not exposed to any China risk, no matter who comes to the White House. This is the one that gets insulated. There is not a whole lot of noise around China when it comes to Amazon.
Anurag, thank you so much. Anurag Rana, there are important comments on the earnings season to come in technology. Paul, I think that's really, really important. I have no clue, but they're going to come out, they're going to say earnings are great, but, and then I need to figure out what's the but on NVIDIA, what's the but on Apple, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't think the market's going to take too kindly to a but. But at some point it's going to happen. As Mandeep Singh and Anurag Rana have pointed out over the last really year and a half, the bar is super high for these tech companies on their earnings and their guidance. That said, they by and large kind of hit that mark and then some in terms of their earnings and their guidance. So the question is, how long can they keep that going? Because the stocks are certainly, pricing in some really, really strong growth for.
Can we have a moment of silence for everybody that just, Apple's been in the dregs for. It's like United Healthcare came out with earnings today. Apple's been doing a United Healthcare for months and months, and then, like they had the meeting, you know. The one that Ed Ludlow went to. He had to wear sneakers with the white soles.
Exactly. Now the stock year to date is up 20%.
It's up 40%.
It's up 40% off of those in the last 5-6 weeks here. So it was all a question of when the stock, I think, would get that AI buzz into the story. And again, I think at their developer meeting back in May, they did a pretty good job convincing the street that, yes, in fact, we've got a good AI strategy.
We're playing Milwaukee music today.
Oh, nice.
RNC music. They're having their convention. You start 40 years ago. 40 years ago. Lee Greenwood. God bless the USA. Good morning.
today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the youth.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo on sabbatical. Nathan Hager of Bloomberg Daybreak.
We're fortunate.
In for Lisa Mateo. Thank you, Nathan. Seriously. Thank you, Nathan Hager. His day starts early. I mean,
yeah.
You know, he gets in at like 4:50.
I know.
It's 9 minutes to set up. And, you know, it's good. We thank Nathan Hager for
with the beltway every day.
assisting from Washington. And, of course, lots of Washington news as well. I got to read the Wikipedia on JD Vance. I'm getting up to speed.
Yeah, I am as well.
You know, that's all there is to it. And we're in Milwaukee. Thank you, Lord Davison, for getting us briefed out in the last hour on day 2 at the Republican National Convention. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines leading our coverage. There's lots going on in the markets as well. Jerome Powell spoke yesterday to David Rubenstein, Economic Club of Washington, and they moved the markets in a big way as well. Let us listen right now to Jerome Powell.
We didn't think it would be appropriate to begin to loosen policy until we had greater confidence that inflation was moving sustainably down to 2%. The 3 readings in the second quarter, including the one from last week, do add somewhat to confidence.
Oh my God, we're adding to confidence. That means price up. Let me translate that. Wendy Schiller has no idea what we're talking about. Wendy, it's price up, yield down, and that's what we see this morning. We'll get to Professor Schiller just in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance from New York City, from Milwaukee, from Providence, Rhode Island, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Discover the future of trading with their next generation trading platform, IBKR Desktop. Download IBKR Desktop. Do that at ibkr.com/desktop. Yeoman's duty. I heard her this morning with Nathan Hager, and we're thrilled that Wendy Schiller could darken the surveillance door this morning as well. All of her work on international relations and definitive textbooks on our American history and our civics. I don't know where to begin, Wendy, with you other than a good 3-hour conversation. But let's get Nathan Hager in here first before we get to Professor Schiller. Here's Nathan Hager in Washington.
Appreciate it. Good morning, Tom. 10-year Treasury price up 14.30 seconds. 10-year Treasury yield down to 4.17%, lowest level since March, on the idea that the Fed can start cutting by September. As for futures, firming up somewhat. S&P futures up 0.2%, up 9 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, up 55 points. NASDAQ futures up nearly 0.25%, up 49 points. NYMEX crude down nearly 2%, now $80.34 per barrel. COMEX gold up 0.6%, 24.4430 per ounce. The euro 1.0902 against the dollar. It's Amazon Prime Day. Now, Amazon Prime Days, that starts today. We just learned that Southwest Airlines has joined a pact with Amazon for a Prime Day deal. Keeping an eye on both those shares throughout the day. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Nathan, thanks so much. Paul, have you ever done Prime Day? I've never done it.
I've not.
Did you get your Vespa through Prime Day?
I did not. I went the old-fashioned way. Went on to the dealer
floor. Do you know
floor.
what Wendy Schiller does?
What?
She uses Prime Day to get pizza in Providence, Rhode Island.
Oh, that's
it works
good
out
pizza.
great. Why don't you bring in Professor
pizza.
Schiller?
No question. Wendy Schiller, she's a professor at Brown University, joining us this morning. Wendy, thanks so much for joining us here. I'd love to get your thoughts here on the selection of JD Vance as vice president candidate there. What did you make of it?
Well, I mean, I think it's the smart but safe choice. I think, you know, Ohio leans red in recent elections. So it solidifies Ohio and it represents, coherence to the Republican platform. It's a missed opportunity as far as I'm concerned. I think that Donald Trump had momentum, and then, of course, the tragic attempt on his life and the loss of life at that rally gives him a platform to extend the tent for the Republican Party. So someone like Tim Scott, I think, would have appealed not only to Black voters for identity politics or descriptive representation reasons, but also to independent voters who are looking for signs that the Republican Party might be moderating somewhat because they've rejected the most extreme candidates in recent elections.
Wendy,
so I think it's a missed opportunity.
To me, Wendy, I totally see what you're saying. To me, there's a new acuity this morning. If Trump-Vance is going to go against Biden-Harris or something else, did that polarity in the Democratic Party change with this announcement of JD Vance?
Well, if anything, I think it doubles down on Kamala Harris to continue to be the VP candidate. And possibly, if Biden steps aside, there's still a little bit of time left for that, for her to be the top of the ticket. It becomes a very stark contrast between a ticket that looks a little bit like the past on the Republican side and a ticket that looks much more like America looks and the future. So I think, again, I'm not sure this does anything to woo back independent voters, which is exactly what the Trump campaign needs states to solidify their lead and win the election. I mean, they're going to get every Republican. They've solidified that. The Republicans are going to be, and they're now counting on unenthusiastic Democratic Party and low turnout on that side, and just core Republican turnout on their side.
So, Wendy, we saw former President Trump make his entrance into the RNC convention yesterday with the patch on his ear. What do you expect him to say in his speech here? Do you expect a different tone from this president? The suggestion seems to be that may be where he's leaning.
Well, I mean, he's certainly done a very good job before this incident of staying disciplined, particularly on reproductive rights and abortion, promising no national ban. I mean, that's where JD Vance's selection kind of contradicts some of his attempts to moderate on abortion, which has been a real problem for the GOP electorally. So that's the confusing part. JD Vance doubles down and is very conservative on that issue. So how do you explain that away? But, you know, will he say, I've learned a lot about life? Will he get personal, emotional? You know, we'll have to wait and see.
I'm fascinated, Professor Schiller, how the former governor of South Carolina adapts to this announcement tonight. I was joking with Laura Davison. What percentage of the Republican floor is traditional Republican versus MAGA? What would you suggest it is? I mean, is 80% of the floor, the Fiserv Center in Milwaukee, MAGA? Is it a bigger number than that?
You know, I mean, I think that number is probably right. You know, there are always establishment Republicans that go to the convention. So they're elected officials from all the 50 states in the Republican Party, and not all of them are as MAGA as Trump. So, you know, that percentage of the delegates won't necessarily be MAGA dominated. But the House right now, the Republican Party in the House, you'd have to say 150 of them are MAGA. And that's going to change in the MAGA direction when we go into 24, because some of the retirements on the Republican side in the House are more moderate. So I do think it's a wholly owned MAGA Trump party. And now with JD Vance on the ticket, that's what they're doubling down on.
So who's Nikki Haley talking to tonight besides, you know, what's to come in 2028? I mean, is she speaking for a cabinet position?
I just don't know. You know, the fate of people who align themselves with Trump is not usually good. You know, they either, you know, get indicted and go to jail, or get indicted and don't go to jail, but they fade away. I mean, it's anybody outside himself doesn't always do well by being associated with him. So it's a bit of a political gamble. She's, you know, what is she doing? Trying to, you know, keep her ties open, keep it open. But now with a young JD Vance as the VP, you know, that if Trump wins, that pretty much crowds out almost everybody else.
Where do they go? I mean, Paul, that's the arch question, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, Wendy, again, what do you expect? Is there anything new to come out of this convention here, this RNC, or is it just Trump moving this party forward?
No, Paul, I think what could be new is if tonight's conversation or rhetoric about immigration is not dehumanizing the way that it's been about the southern border. In other words, Biden failed, it's not secure, that's the rhetoric of the GOP. But if you really start to say everybody's a criminal, et cetera, I think that turns off independence. So what could be new here is if Trump can actually moderate the rhetoric and language on immigration, which he's never done. But if he can, that helps them a little bit with independent voters. So what I'm looking for, which is new, is a softening a little bit about the way that they talk about these issues. I don't know if that will happen, but I think it's a risk for the Republican Party not to do that.
What to listen for tonight. Wendy Schiller, thank you so much, at Brown University, the Taubman Center. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers charges dollar margin loan rates from 5.83% to 6.83%, rates subject to change. Learn more at ibkr.com/compare. ibkr.com/compare. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom and Paul. 2 days after surviving an attempted assassination, former President Donald Trump appeared triumphantly at the Republican National Convention's opening night with a bandage over his right ear, the latest compelling scene in a presidential campaign already defined by dramatic turns. Bloomberg News deputy politics editor Laura Davison is in Milwaukee.
Just with about an hour to go of speeches on the floor, he made this big grand entrance. Everyone was, focused on him, not on the stage at all. He had a bandage on his right ear, where, of course, a bullet grazed his ear, just a couple days ago. He came up through the crowd a little bit, and then there was a special section where Trump and his family and JD Vance, his newly picked vice presidential candidate, was sitting next to him, where they heard the last bit of speeches. But it was really a sort of the iconic moment. This is the first time that Trump had appeared publicly since the shooting, and will be sort of the defining moment, to kick off this convention.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Special counsel Jack Smith will appeal a Florida judge's decision dismissing the federal case charging Donald Trump with mishandling classified information and obstruction, according to a spokesman for Smith's office. Yesterday, U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon tossed out the case after finding Attorney General Merrick Garland's appointment of Smith as special counsel to investigate Trump was unconstitutional. Bloomberg Law's June Grasso says Judge Cannon stands alone on this.
She stands on not solid ground, and I think she was moved to do this and encouraged even more by Clarence Thomas's solo concurrence in the presidential immunity case.
June Grasso speaking with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons. The government now will take the fight to the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Baseball's All-Star Game is tonight. Last night, Los Angeles Dodgers' Teoscar Hernandez won the Home Run Derby. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
Let's talk about the heat. It's a different heat. It's a third heat wave now. And to me, it's different. We're finally into like summer. I came out of the door this morning to the Bentley, and I'm sorry, it felt like my imagination of what northern Mississippi's like in July.
Well, the thing of it is like we were saying, real feel is going to be like 100 yesterday. No, it's probably going to hit 100 real
Baltimore's
temperatures.
like 103, 104.
Yeah. So this is
this is
no joke.
Old South summer, which I didn't grow up with.
No.
It's all new.
No, but it's real, and it looks like it's going to peak tomorrow, and then maybe a little bit of a break.
Can I have a shout out? I mean, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Can we have a moment of silence for Con Ed and people in the street that holes open, they got the pylons up, and whatever they're working on, whether they build new infrastructure, we sit there fat and happy, and we just assume the electricity's not going off.
And it's not just Con Ed, it's any construction crew out there that has the work today. God bless you all, because that's some rough hustle, man.
Thank you to Con Ed and all of our utilities around the world helping with this heat wave. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, I'm Nathan Hager. Green on the screen, light green, but stocks are trading close to records. SP futures right now up 0.2%, so are Dow and NASDAQ futures. 10-year Treasury yield 4.17%, yield sinking. We're waiting for retail sales data, see if they add to bets that the Fed can start cutting rates by September. NYMEX crude is down nearly 2% to $80.35 per barrel. COMEX gold up 0.2% at $24.4520 per ounce. Biggest gainer in the pre-market, Match. Those shares are higher by nearly 8%, with activist investor Starboard building more than 6.6% stake in the dating app. And Microsoft's investment in Inflection AI is getting a full-blown UK antitrust probe over its hiring of former employees of the AI startup. Microsoft shares little changed in early trading. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much. What's his name again?
Nathan
Hager, star of Bloomberg Daybreak, extending the day out. You know, he's only doing this because it's 100 in Washington.
I know, he's not going outside.
It's just another excuse to
They
stay
built
inside.
the Capitol on a swamp.
Yeah, Nathan Hager, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. This is a good interview, good conversation, except this morning it's beyond well-timed. Shamalia Khan joins us now, UBS Asset Management, tour duty at AllianceBernstein and others, hugely qualified in fixed income, constructing portfolios, trying to figure out what to do when it was priced down, yield up. That was ugly. And Shamalia Khan joins us this morning. Let me cut to the chase. My Bloomberg screen, Shamalia, says we're at a key inflection point in the bond market. Price up, yield down. Do you have a general tendency forward, a further price up, further yield reduction?
Now, you're absolutely right. We are at an inflection point, and that inflection point is particularly important for emerging market countries, which is what I invest in. And I think that's going to be the key driver of performance for emerging markets over the coming months. At this point in time, we think that emerging markets are offering attractive relative value in fixed income. Yields are at absolute highs. There's actually been negative net supply out of emerging market countries, which means that they have been actually issuing less than what they have been paying down to the market. And the default cycle has peaked in EM. So the Fed cutting cycle is an important tailwind for the sector.
So where in emerging markets do you see the best opportunity, Shamalia?
The best opportunity, in my opinion, really has been in the hard currency dollar-denominated debt of countries that are high yielding and lower rated. And that's been our call for the last year or so. And some of these countries are up 30, 40, 50% for the year. And we think there's still good return potential. Many of these countries are following much better.
So what are these countries? Where are they? Is there a regional play, or is it just go down to the credit profile?
You're absolutely right. Just go down to the credit profile. These are across the globe. They're in Latin America, they're Africa, they're in Eastern Europe, there's Asia. It's basically looking at the individual credit profile and doing the bottoms-up work in many of these countries. So examples are Angola, Egypt, Ghana, Tunisia, Sri Lanka. I can go on.
To go IMF on you, Shamalia, is the price up, yield down, and particularly affecting less developed countries, is it nothing more than a deflationary play?
No, so the increased levels of rates impacted these countries less from a fundamental perspective, but more from a sentiment perspective. And that's where you see the risk premium really going up for these countries, because investors thought they were going to have to default. The reality is what they did was they tightened their belts. They implemented structural reforms, and they got good liquidity from multilaterals at concessional rates. So frankly, they haven't really been paying the higher rates because they've been getting funding from sources that are providing them at very competitive rates.
Shamalia, I have to ask you about China here. It's just such a fluid situation, and it's such a big part of the MSCI index. What's your view of China these days?
Right. And I would say, look, China for equities versus China for fixed income are two different things. Fixed income indices are very diversified. They have much less concentration on any single country versus the EM equity indices. And with respect to China, we've also been bullish in the sense that we do expect them to address some of these structural and cyclical issues in the property sector, particularly, which have impacted the growth in the country. And we expect that trend to continue going forward. Valuations were very cheap in the China high yield sector, and they continue to be cheap.
Yeah.
We find value over there. So we are constructive on the China high yield fixed income sector.
Somalia, Matt Winkler of Bloomberg yesterday did a tour de force essay on the shock of the South Africa recovery. I don't want to turn this into a dissertation, but the bottom line is maybe like Greece X number of years ago, it wasn't about bond markets, it wasn't about Fobosi and fixed income, it was about a sea change. Did South Africa go through a sea change to allow for their price up, yield down movement?
I would say there are a number of countries in emerging market going through a sea change. South Africa just went through a very complicated election, so therefore we're a little bit less constructive there because they've had to basically navigate a very difficult coalition with respect to forming a government, but also running the government going forward. But there are other countries in sub-Saharan Africa which we believe are going through sea changes, and policy mix is improving. Markets just not paying enough attention to those.
Shemalia, talk to us about Latin America here. Where do you see the opportunities? I think when I talk to EM folks about Latin America, they typically lead with Mexico and maybe talking about the onshoring, the friendshoring, all those types of things. From a EM high, from a fixed income perspective, where do you see the best opportunities in Latin America?
Yes, and I think that's an interesting point to raise because there were some EM countries that were very much the darlings of the investor universe, which we were actually concerned about because we thought that enough risk wasn't being priced, and Mexico was one of those, and that was before the elections. And clearly, a risk premium has been priced into EM Mexican assets. So therefore, we are more constructive than we were before elections, but the places where we've actually found opportunities in Latin America are the ones that investors typically don't like Argentina and Ecuador. And we are, continuing to assess opportunities in that space.
One final question. From where you sit, is the IMF, do they have a new strategy that's efficacious for the EM financial system? I need to get away from the soap opera of Argentina. Is the IMF being constructive in their discussion of selected bailouts?
I believe they are. I do think that IMF has played a very important role in providing liquidity to these countries at a time when the risk premium was very high. And it's also provided an incentive for the countries to follow a more stable macroeconomic policy framework if they can get support from an entity like IMF that can give them funding at a concessional rate. So yes, I do think they are playing a more constructive role. And I think they are also now paying more attention to the social aspect of their program, which is very important.
Thank you so much. Shemalia Khan with us here with UBS here on EM. We don't do enough. I mean, it's Damien and it's micro movements and all that. But the actual, we don't know, Paul, I would suggest, you can see it on the Bloomberg. I don't know why I don't know it. There's been some significant gains in some of these stories.
Yeah, and Shemalia was saying...
Like NVIDIA-like gains.
Exactly. And Shemalia was saying, they're partial to U.S. dollar-denominated high-yielding countries, and she says she finds, from a credit perspective, if you find the good credit profiles out there, opportunities across the globe. So that's kind of where they're sticking, high quality, it seems like.
Interesting morning. It's a Tuesday morning.
It's a Tuesday.
And it's just a whole different thing. I'm still in shock from the assassination attempt.
Yeah.
I'm like everybody else. I'm processing it, and it's great to see him last night.
Yep.
There.
Yep.
And he spoke to President. It's great. I mean, they spoke on the cordially was the word that was.
Yeah, I'll be interested.
It's like when I
to
talk
hear
to
his
Lisa.
speech.
It's cordial.
Exactly.
It's like, that was good to see. Tonight, day 2 of the convention. I have no idea. Nikki Haley. I guess,
Nikki Haley's probably the
tonight,
headline.
so
Yep, headline.
That'll be the headline. It'll be fascinating to see how she's received.
All I know is there's no baseball this week because it's All-Star.
I don't like it.
Yeah, it's a tough week of the
You don't
summer.
want to go there with me. I'm not happy. The All-Star game used to be simple. They played the game. And now they have home run derby. It's just
It's a whole week. It's a whole week.
For who?
For
I'm not watching. Are you?
I don't know, the networks, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's about TV, I guess. That's all there is to it. A lift to the market. Futures up 9. Bonds price up yield down. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, I'm Nathan Hager. Green on the screen for futures and treasuries. S&P futures up 0.2% or 8 points. Dow futures 0.2% higher as well, up 62 points. NASDAQ futures up 49 points, also gained 0.2%. 10-year treasury up 16/32, yield down to 4.16%. NYMEX crude's down 1.8% at $80.46 per barrel. COMEX gold up 0.5% at $24.4270 per ounce, and the euro 1.0891 against the dollar. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Nathan, thanks so much. Constructive numbers. We had a negative statistic last month and some revisions still negative. But I'm sorry, these are very, very constructive nominal numbers for retail sales. The control group's what I look at, which is you take out this, you take out that. 0.2%, and it came in at a stunning positive 0.9%. Futures advanced now on a first look of a buoyant consumer. Paul, the control group, I'm sorry, this is a time where Mike McKee's got to go beneath the headline data.
He does. And again, just the headline numbers across the board better than expected this month for retail sales. We also had some positive revisions, Tom, to last month. So to the extent folks are trying to get a sense of how this consumer's faring out there, with all the inflation and so on, this month's periods of June, much better than expected.
Dead on about the revisions coming in. For example, one revision, the advanced month over month, which McKee looks at, 0.1%. They correct, adjust, revise to 0.3%. The market lifts. I got some sprightly green, futures up 11. They were up 8. In the yield space off of Jerome Powell, they're going to cut 14 times before September, right, goes the other way with higher yields, just a little bit, but it's very fluid right now.
It really is. But again, the retail sales control group came in at 0.9%. Consensus was 0.2%, so a real outperformance.
The control group is where you say to your children, I see the charge card charges.
It's real time.
I've
got the app.
What is Sephora? And she said to me, it's a learning experience.
Oh, okay.
It's getting ready for your ACTs, SATs. You go to Sephora Education for that. Our economic data, always provided with the leadership of Commonwealth, joined over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow in your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn how. As I said, it's very dynamic, which means there's only one person to talk to, Sarah House, senior economist at Wells Fargo, the queen of Excel spreadsheet analysis. Sarah, which of the 4 lines headline or 40 lines beneath the headline data matter for retail sales? What will you look for at Wells Fargo?
Yeah, so we're looking at a couple of the line items. So I think the control group is key, given that that's in many ways the new piece of information that's going to in particular feed into the B's estimate of at least the good side of consumer spending. And there we saw a great print, which illustrates that it's hard to keep the American consumer down. So we might be seeing growing signs of strain, but that doesn't mean that consumers are going to shy away completely. As long as we're seeing job growth, some income growth, consumers are going to go out and spend.
And Paul, this has been the 18-month 36-month missed call by all of us. What Sarah House just said there, like Michelle Meyer at MasterCard, we underestimate this American consumer.
How does this fit in, Sarah, with the concerns out there about inflation? The inflation levels, price levels that people have to pay day in and day out are so high, and presumably that hurts the lower income sector or segments of the economy, the consumer, the most. How do we see that in these numbers, if at all?
Yeah, so I think we see them a little bit. So for example, the food, in terms of food, grocery store sales, those are up just 0.1%. So that actually matches the increase in prices that we saw last month. So essentially flat grocery store sales is what we're seeing. So I think in some segments, while consumers might be going out and still treating themselves here and there, I think they are buckling down in some of the day-to-day necessities, especially for those consumers where food makes up a larger portion of their basket.
And that kind of goes to, I guess, the question of the labor market here. You put the retail sales number together with the labor market. Is it safe to say that, by and large, while there's still high inflation, the consumer is kind of at the very least hanging in there, if not doing fairly well?
Yeah, I think the consumer soldiering on. So I think there, again, are some signs of strains that not doing as well as they were a year or two ago. We can see that in terms of the real income growth. So real disposable income is growing less than 2%, just given the fact that you do still have somewhat elevated inflation. You're not seeing it come down as quickly as you were last year. But at the same time, you're seeing income growth moderate as we're not adding quite as many jobs. The average hourly earnings that are derived from those jobs aren't growing quite as quickly. But at the same time, there's still positive income growth. And we're seeing that getting turned around and consumers going back out and putting it back into the economy.
I'm looking at the percentage changes here. And, Sarah House, I think a lot of people, including me, don't understand how granular nominal retail sales reporting is. So I got furniture at home, I got autos, I got vehicle parts, I got women's shoe stores. Why don't we go to that? Let's go to women's shoe stores. And those are negative statistics, which, Sarah House, I have trouble believing here. But which of those lines is the tea leaf you look at?
Well, I think it's useful to look at them in concert. I think especially, 1 month they can move around. I think the non-store retailers is an increasingly important one where e-commerce is making up a growing share, and I think is a little bit more encompassing in terms of what consumers are spending on. And there we saw a huge gain,
right.
So 1.9%. And so,
Yeah.
yes, you can get some details here and there, but it's getting less and less important, less and less relevant, just as it's getting folded into that non-store.
I mean, they got
retailers.
3-month annualized, but far more importantly, they got year over year. And I'm sorry, Paul, I don't want to get into the numbers because I'm an amateur, but non-store retailers.
What is that?
Amazon sticks
there
out
you
like
go.
a sore thumb.
Boom, there you go. Non-store retailers, we know that. Boxes piling up in front of everybody's door. So, Sarah, how do you think the Federal Reserve is going to interpret kind of some of this data we've seen today and over the last several days?
Yeah, so I think today's data is some of the better data that we've had in terms of some of the activity indicators recently. But I think when we look at the data in totality, as the Fed has said that they are, I think we are seeing signs of the labor market cooling off. So yes, we're still adding jobs, but it's not nearly at the same clip we were 6 months ago, a year ago. Again, income growth isn't quite as strong, and we're seeing signs of businesses pulling back on their hiring plans, and couple that with the improvement we've seen in inflation. I think this still points towards the Fed getting ready to ease policy as we move towards the fall.
Okay, we got a surveillance emergency, Sarah. We're gonna have to go, but Sarah House, thank you so much. I really can't wait for the research note to sort all this out. They break it down. They've got the Lisa Mateo Costco line, warehouse clubs. They've been doing warehouse clubs. Is a single line item. I mean, it's way more detail here, folks, than just what you get from the financial media as well. We got to go to this. Barr's going to cover it.
Yep.
But I mean, John Tucker is stuck in a train in the tunnels. I mean, right
exactly.
now.
So we've got New Jersey Transit calling for, they have a 30-minute delay at Penn Station. They got a train stuck in one of the tunnels.
And Tucker's on it.
It could very well be.
Droopy wires.
They're gonna pull the train up next, and there's a little yellow plastic board you walk across, and they got these people going across. And they looked at me and go, no, not you. They had to get a crane out for me.
I knew when we were going to have 100-degree temperatures for real that here we go.
Yeah, but it's like the helicopters. The helicopters can't fly. It gets hot enough.
It's too hot, yeah.
And there's, they're being safe, and they have a band. I don't want to make people afraid here, but there's a point where the pilots go, no, we can't do it.
Yeah, and I want to explain that. It's really quick. Not because, the hot from the heat that is going to mess with the helicopter. It's because they can't get the lift the same way it is for planes.
Yeah. That's like
it's much harder.
That's like me getting out of a chair after the third martini. There's no lift. With our news in New York City, Michael Bye.
Thank you very much, Tom and Paul. Day 2 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Yesterday, the RNC officially nominated Donald Trump, and it was learned Senator JD Vance of Ohio was going to be his running mate. Yesterday, delegates then heard from a flurry of speakers praising their nominee. Congressman Byron Donalds pushed the new theme of the party.
And if there was ever a time in our nation to come together, that time is now.
Congressman Donalds of Florida. Today, the theme of the RNC will be immigration. Meanwhile, Donald Trump released his new sneakers themed after the weekend assassination attempt. Trump's sneakers released the Fight, Fight, Fight sneakers. $299 limited edition high tops are printed with the now iconic photo of Trump. As for President Biden, he is now saying it was a mistake to say he wanted to put a bullseye on Donald Trump. But in an NBC News interview with Lester Holt, the president says his opponent's rhetoric has been more incendiary.
was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said I want to be a dictator on day one.
President Biden also tells NBC's Lester Holt he plans to debate former President Trump again in September. Special counsel Jack Smith will appeal a Florida judge's decision dismissing the federal case charging Donald Trump with mishandling classified information and obstruction. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon tossed out the case after finding Attorney General Merrick Garland's appointment of Smith as special counsel to investigate Trump was unconstitutional. The government now will take the fight to the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
I haven't talked about it. Don't know what to think about it, but there it is. I'm right near a 64,000 print on BitDog.
Yeah.
And the answer is we go on 57, 58,000, and there is a persistent lift to Bitcoin.
Yep.
And I see people tying it into our nation's political dialogue. I'm not there, but
yeah, that's what I
analysts are saying
understand. That perhaps this a potential second Trump administration would be more open, more supportive of crypto.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see on that. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning with their immense support. We're brought to you by IBKR. IBKR Financial Advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost, global trading, and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. They have been with us forever. We thank them for their commitment. Interactive Brokers to economics, finance, investment, and the Detroit Lions as well. They're out there in the heat. Come on, Mike. I mean, when does the football, when does fall training start?
Remember when it used to be a 12-week season?
Yeah. What's it now,
Yeah.
16?
What, 18 now? Is it
Is it
17 or
18?
17 or 18? It's longer than 16. I know
Really,
that.
Ari, it's 18? Wow, I didn't. That's
17
That's
games,
like stretching
18,
hockey
okay.
into July.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Yeah, why would you do that?
yeah.
Why would you go to June? That's they want to add a 19th game, Ari? A
Yeah.
second by.
Wow. It's all for the
I can
TV
see,
money.
you know what? And I can see that happening. Yeah, and you're right. It has to do with the coin.
It'll create more jobs though in the NFL. They're going to need expanded rosters for all this stuff, and that'll be more jobs.
Yeah, I have trouble with the dilution of it. I mean, I see it in baseball right now. All-Star game, is it tonight?
Yeah.
Tonight.
No, the Pittsburgh.
Where? I'm not sure.
I may tune in for the Pittsburgh Phenom. We'll have to see on that.
Oh, the pitcher. That's right.
Off retail sales, futures lift. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, I'm Nathan Hager, watching futures rise and treasury yields come off session lows after better than expected retail sales data. We check the markets all day long on Bloomberg. S&P futures right now up 1%, up 13 points. Dow futures up 141 points, a gain of nearly 0.4%. NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, or 65 points. 10-year treasury now up 5/30 seconds, the yield at 4.20%. NYMEX crude down 1.8%, $80.46 per barrel. COMEX gold up 0.4% at $24.38 even per ounce. The euro 1.0884 against the dollar. Shares of Trump Media and Technology, the parent of Truth Social, down nearly 9%. They gained more than 30% yesterday, but Trump Media registered 38 million shares in a financing pact with Yorkville Advisors that, if it goes through, could dilute existing investor stakes. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Joining us now in 8 Ways to Go in a 3-hour conversation, Dana Telsey, Chief Executive Officer, Telsey Advisory Group, definitive on retail and really to the heart and soul of her childhood as well. Dana, Paul's got a bunch of questions on retail, but I got to talk to you now about the character of luxury turned upside down. And it can be anything besides famous brands buying huge amounts of real estate on Fifth Avenue, and on the other side, detailed articles of heavy discounting in China. I mean, just as an example, the people from Venice, Bottega Veneta, that's the basket weave leather things every woman needs. I mean, Dana, what in God's name is going on in retail? Is it, and I guess the summary is it going to be an Arno roll-up?
In luxury retail, and Tom, thank you, and Paul for having me today. I think overall you are seeing the big getting bigger. You look at Fifth Avenue, like you mentioned, and could it be one day that the four corners of 57th Street are all occupied by LVMH? Right now they occupy 3 of the corners, and Goodman is going to be owned by Saks if the transaction goes through with Neiman Marcus. But luxury goods, and I had just gotten off the phone with Rishman, it's interesting some of the resiliency that's out there, given the fact that we have seen moderation. The Americas is holding up, even with sales having moderated. And I think as we go through this earnings season cycle, we are going to see everyone's become a little bit more discerning. And we haven't seen the return of tourist travel from the Chinese. And that's arbiter to come.
I mean, and this is brilliant. I mean, Richemont, I believe, is Cartier. I get that these iconic names that will always be there. But in the reporting I saw on China, Montclair is the fancy ski jackets that your kids need, Paul.
Oh, okay.
If I don't have a Montclair jacket, I'm not going to be able to survive. Dana Telsey, Montclair's discounting 50%. In 2 years or 4 years, where is that partition of luxury between the successful fancy people and the others discounting? I just don't get how they survive.
I don't think discounting is really a part of the luxury ethos. And one of the things we've seen happen, and we see basically less discounting in leather goods than in other categories. Certainly some of the major European houses don't even discount at all. I think what you see with some of the fashion pieces out there, and certainly those where you have weather trends that dictate things, you do have to move inventory. It's going to be very interesting to see now, and you mentioned it earlier, what happened with Burberry with the changing of the guard that's going on there at the C-level position.
Hey, Dana, we got some retail sales data that came out this morning, and just looking at the controlled group, positive 0.9% above the consensus for 0.2%. So it looks like from that data point, the consumer's doing pretty well. Does that tie in with what you're hearing from your retail companies that you follow?
I think it's very mixed. I think overall back to school is going to be very measured. From the retailers I'm looking at, look at the data points that we got last week. You saw strength at Aritzia, a very big apparel retailer, with frankly only 52 stores in the U.S., an opportunity to grow. You saw, talk about luxury, Brunello Cucinelli, saw strength in the U.S., up high teens. But then you saw companies like Pepsi say that they're seeing the customer be very more value-minded and discerning in what they're spending after 3 to 4 years of elevated pricing and inflation. That even the higher income consumer is measuring the restaurants they go to and the frequency. So I'm thinking it's very measured, and we've seen a moderation in the spend.
Dana Telsey, how do you and Joe Feldman study charge card data? Michelle Meyer joined us here 10 days ago from MasterCard, and she says, look, this is what people are doing, they're spending, and we just saw it with a good retail sales report and good revisions. How do you at Telsey Advisory Group study what Paul Sweeney does over the weekend with his charge card?
Couple different things. So number one, we're going to the stores ourselves and talking and seeing what the promotions are. Number two, we're doing weekly web scraping data of what the promotions look like week over week, but also we have this data going back years. So we look at it year over year too, in order to assess the changes in pricing, but also the changes in product trends. And then we're looking at the quantitative data of different snippets that we can glean, whether it's of credit cards or whether it's of company commentary, like what you had last week, outside of the purview of just retail, as long as it relates to the consumer.
Dana, thank you so much. Dana Telsey there on luxury, the struggles in China as well. With the Telsey Advisory Group, brilliant research from her and her colleagues. We protect their copyright. Get their good research at Telsey Advisory Group. Sometimes there's a note from Ellen Zentner and Sam Coffin and the team. Sometimes there's a blistering note. They have a blistering note out, folks. The control group showed broad-based strength, according to Morgan Stanley. E-commerce, which we heard from Sarah House. Home furnishing. Vespa sales were phenomenal. Weakness concentrated in motor vehicle sales. And they slammed their GDP numbers higher. There's no other way to put it. They put real consumption from 1.4% to 2%.
Yeah, wow.
Paul, that's ginormous.
That is ginormous, and we certainly pay attention to Ellen Zentner and her team over there. But again, you look at those retail sales numbers today, Tom, and across the board, much stronger than expected. And again, it leads a lot of Fed watchers to say, maybe this Fed can pull
And I'm going to go all Alarian on you. What's the unknown now? And they have a key supply side shock positive. Stronger population growth.
Yep.
To me, I talk about productivity, folks, and we've underestimated it and all that. But Paul, the population growth off of immigration, migration, whatever. I'm sorry, it's tangible, and we can't calculate that right now.
No, and we're starting to see the economists out there and some of the government data start to reflect that migration of folk coming over the southern border. A couple things are happening. One, many of them are working, and number two, they're spending money. So, I mean, the politics aside, yes, you have to have a more coherent border policy, but that migration is showing up in some of the economic data in this country.
I mean, it's key here. That's from Morgan Stanley. I'm sure we'll hear from a lot of others as well. But, the recession thing ain't happening.
No.
And that's all there is to it.
I mean, Morgan Stanley, again, they're tracking second quarter consumption at 2% annualized rate, a pickup from 1.5% growth in the first quarter. So a real pickup there in consumption.
We're playing GOP music today.
Oh, good.
It's Milwaukee, and you get in the mood. We'll play Democratic Party music when they're in Chicago as well. So what's that mean? I mean, who do you have to play? You got to think big here.
Yep.
I think it's a Gibson ES355. I can't remember, but I mean, there's only one guy that personifies old fart rock,
right,
for the GOP.
Yeah.
T. Nugent.
Oh yeah, big.
You gotta go Ted Nugent if you want to go GOP in Milwaukee. This is sick. This is almost 50 years ago. God, I'm old. Ted for Milwaukee. I'm playing this for Joe Matthew.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo on sabbatical. Nathan Hager down in Washington. Thank you, Nathan, for a very long day. The star of Bloomberg Daybreak, giving us bond dynamics. Bond dynamics this morning it's been pretty good off of Jerome Powell's comments yesterday. And Paul, I'm sorry, the lead story here off of the Morgan Stanley Ellen Zentner note.
Yeah.
A moment of silence for Michelle Meyer. She needs silence. Her kids are so ill-mannered that she needs a moment of silence. Michelle Meyer absolutely nailed this retail sales call.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. She called it. She says the good folks at MasterCard, they're seeing good activity on the
she
card.
Says the gloom is baloney. That's
exactly
what we saw today.
And retail sales come in better than expected today, Tom.
We got so much going on. We're going to get right to it here this morning. Futures up 10, Dow futures up 139. The VIX comes in nicely, almost down to a 12 level. Not there yet. The real yield, 10-year real yield, 1.89%. That was newsworthy this morning. Comes back a little bit, 1.93% right now. Gold, with the dollar stronger here. And again, the yen dynamics are tangible as well. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. And through all of Bloomberg Surveillance today, brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Their bond marketplace, access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities with no markups or built-in spreads and low, transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds with our Bloomberg Business Flash in Washington. Nathan Hager.
I'll start you off with a red headline from Washington. The World Economic Outlook just out from the International Monetary Fund, warning inflation in many major economies has been cooling more slowly than expected, raising a potential risk to global growth from interest rates staying higher for even longer. As for the markets, as you mentioned, futures firming on retail sales surprise. We check the markets all day long on Bloomberg. S&P futures up 8 points or 0.2%. Dow futures up 136 points. That's a gain of 0.3%. NASDAQ futures up 0.2% or 40 points. 10-year Treasury up 7/30 seconds. The yield 4.2%. The 2-year at 4.46. NYMEX crude's down 1.9% at $80.40 per barrel. COMEX gold up about 0.4% at 24.3730 per ounce. The euro 1.0878 against the dollar. The yen 158.75. We continue to watch bank shares following earnings from Bank of America. They're higher by 1%. BofA's guiding for a net interest income boost in the fourth quarter. And Morgan Stanley is lower after reporting a wealth management revenue. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Nathan Hager, thank you so much in Washington. We've got a great guest coming up at this hour. Joe Grano's scheduled to be with us, legendary at Payne Weber, talking here about Wall Street and finance in a relationship with a new Democratic Party and certainly a new Republican Party with Trump, Vance as well. We have someone at Bloomberg hugely qualified for it. I can make a joke that her wonderful book, Paper Soldiers, it's merch. It's in all the, the bags you get. You get the little bag when you go to a convention. Yep. Every delegate, 1,200 of them, they get a copy of Paper Soldiers. I'm kidding. But joining us now with the book of the year on the linkage here of finance into Washington, Paper Soldiers, How the Weaponization of the Dollar Changed the World Order. Saleha Mohsen, our Treasury Watch, joins right now. Saleha, good morning. Your first chapter says Surviving Donald Trump. From where you sit, how does big business, how does Wall Street, how does a traditional GOP, quote, survive Donald Trump?
What a great question. It's so nice to be on with you, Tom. I would say listen very carefully. Trump is someone who, yes, there's volatility. Yes, he says a lot of things and kind of sticks the wet finger in the air to test what do his supporters want to see in terms of policy. But if you watch him and listen very, very carefully, you will see all the clues and the signals about what he is deciding to do. There's really no big secret. All of the information, as officials are fighting inside of his administration in the past, it all comes out. So we get to see it all play out.
We're going to see it all played out. But the heart of the matter is is Donald Trump's triumph for the elites was his tax legislation. That comes up here. He may even mention it in his speech on Thursday. From your reporting, is there a guesstimate that tax legislation will go away and we'll see higher taxes for the Trump fancy people or not?
It's really, really hard to have an answer to that amazing question because we don't know where the Congress is going to lie. In order to pass any kind of tax legislation, Trump is going to need the support of both chambers of Congress, and we don't know if the House could flip back to Republicans.
Right.
Well, what's going to happen in the Senate?
Unfair question. Does he need 60 votes in the Senate to change Paul Sweeney's tax bill?
I don't know about Paul Sweeney's tax bill. Maybe he needs all the votes in the Senate.
Jump in.
Saleha,
what about the tax deduction in New Jersey? What do you call it? The real estate thing?
Yeah, the 10th. Yeah, don't even go there.
It's painful.
Yeah, and Matt Miller, he's now a homeowner,
tangible.
so it's tangible. So, Saleha, last 24 hours, the news coming out of the convention, JD Vance. What's the feeling in Washington, D.C. this morning about the selection of JD Vance as a vice presidential candidate?
Everyone wants to know how he secured the nomination. His name was on the short list of candidates that Trump was going to choose. The Burgum supporters were really out there pushing that it's going to be him, it's going to be him. Oh, maybe it's going to be Rubio. There are a couple of names that had been out there that it turns out they were never even vetted for the job. Trump definitely did an apprentice-style Veep stakes for this. JD Vance is young. He's 40 years younger than Donald Trump. He is now being seen as the heir apparent. So in Washington, we are combing through everything that Vance has said, particularly when it comes to financial and economic policy.
And Saleha, I guess, tonight will be Nikki Haley speaking at the convention. How is she going to navigate this? Because she's a recent addition to the speaking lineup. What does Washington think we're going to see tonight?
Paul, that's a really interesting thing that we're watching because Nikki's last-minute ad, it happened after the attempted assassination on Saturday. It's kind of a signal that maybe Trump is leaning toward unity. A lot of Republicans who have come out, House Speaker Mike Johnson has come out to say we need to lower the temperature in this country and around this election. We have not heard from from Donald Trump himself. Is he going to also join those calls for unity?
Saleha, it's a slow news day. You're so connected. I mean, Paper Soldiers comes out, folks. It's like ginormous success within finance, reading, and all that. Saleha, you know everything. James Dimon, the next Secretary of Treasury. Come on, Saleha, help me.
Oh, I don't know. People love to throw his name out there. I think he kind of maybe enjoys the speculation as well. But when it comes to Trump world, there's been some very different names that have been thrown about.
Well, give me a name. I mean, who's your bet here? Come on, nobody's listening, Saleha. Who's your bet? Who's your bet here that we're going to see as Secretary of Treasury? Don't tell me it's a Mnuchin redux.
No, I don't have a bet. The names that have been reported are John Paulson, who everyone knows that name. There's Scott Bessent, who came from Soros and now runs a hedge fund. These are names that are kind of floated for top economic policymaking roles. Senator Bill Hagerty from the Senate, I think his name is sort of in the mix for a senior cabinet post.
Okay, but all these people are really in touch with America. I mean, I should mention John.
That's a good question.
I mentioned John Paulson's philanthropy to Central Park South. Saleha, again, congratulations on Paper Soldiers. Folks, you go, okay, I want a dry book on Treasury finance that I can take a nap in the cash room at the Treasury with. Not. Saleha delivers this incredible people, almost gossip rag of all the tension in the history of the modern Treasury, back to Bob Rubin and all. Sure. Really extraordinary. Paper Soldiers, it is a definitive read for those of Global Wall Street. Saleha Moshe, thank you so much. And my money's on James Dimon. Come on.
Oh, boy. Nah, he's
not
going to work for
Andrew
anybody.
Mellon,
He's not going to work for anybody.
Grow a mustache.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, interesting to see how this will all play out. But, again, important week in Milwaukee here.
I mean, it's an important week in Milwaukee. And the summary to me, not being an expert on this, is he went with the easy pick, the comfortable pick. Wendy Schiller said that.
Yep.
And what in God's name, who is Nikki Haley talking to tonight? That's what I don't get.
Exactly. So, and the other thing is this takes the at least for the moment, the lens off of the Democratic Party and what they're going to do with their
For the
candidate
moment,
and the
what,
president.
48 hours?
But the president, he's spoke to Lester Holt last night, and clearly trying to rally. But we'll have to see how that plays out once this convention in Milwaukee concludes.
You're on the phone with the governor while Soleil is on the interview. Any news on Tucker stuck on the train?
I don't know. Hopefully, they got to clear that up. I mean, you get this train stuck in the tubes, and then you start thinking about, do they have power?
So are you
and air
taking the
conditioning?
ferry today?
Well, I may be. That's what we're on ferry watch.
And what
today.
do? You like on Titanic, Jack, and what's her name? You're at the bow of the ferry
exactly
with a beverage in your hand.
As we
Can
sail,
you see it, Michael Barr?
Oh, I can see the beverage.
and we literally sail past the Statue of Liberty, so it is an amazing
I
trip.
can just see you out in the bow.
Yep.
With the interns.
Exactly.
And there is the Statue of Liberty with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
I'm analyst of the world, yes. It's day 2 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Immigration will be the topic today. Yesterday, Donald Trump made his first public appearance since getting shot in an assassination attempt with a white bandage covering his right ear as Republicans gathered to nominate him as their presidential candidate for the 3rd time. Trump says Ohio Senator JD Vance will be his vice presidential pick. More with Bloomberg News senior writer Stephanie Baker.
I think his pick of JD Vance as his running mate after all the speculation indicates that he is doubling down on the populist MAGA message that it is very tough talking. That is not reinforcing the idea of unity, of a sort of restrained, more disciplined rhetoric.
Bloomberg Stephanie Baker. On the first night of the RNC, Teamsters President Sean O'Brien says the American people know the system is broken.
You know what I see? An American worker being taken for granted. Workers being sold out to big banks, big tech, corporates, and the elite.
Meanwhile, President Biden is in Nevada today and is expected to propose new steps to cap rent increases nationwide. The complaint heard coast to coast. The rent is too high. Up 9% in Las Vegas in the past 3 years. President Biden today visiting that city and is expected to call on Congress to pass legislation that would prevent landlords from raising rent by more than 5% each year. With the Paris Olympics less than 2 weeks away, a question hangs over the games. Will the Seine River be clean enough for athletes to swim in it? Triathlon and marathon swimming, they're scheduled to take place in the Seine, where it has been illegal to swim for nearly a century due to pollution levels. Now, Paris invested about $1.5 billion in building infrastructure to catch more stormwater when it rains. We'll see if that works. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Tom and Paul.
See, Barr never listens to the show. We've been having team coverage of, will they swim in the River Seine?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, is it Michael Barr really up in the air right now?
It's still up in the air. I mean, that thing is dirty. I mean, that's not what I want to hear if I'm a swimmer. Yeah, well, it's been illegal for a century.
Katie Greifield's taking Gus for the dressage, and I made a joke. Gus ought to swim in the river. She said her people sent me a nasty note.
Yeah, exactly.
Said, don't make jokes about Gus. Can I mention gold's at a record high?
Yeah.
$24.41.
Wow, look at that.
Up $12.
Yep.
I think it's a record high. I don't have that confirmed, but that's what my Bloomberg terminal says. We'll have to see on that. Futures up 13. The VIX coming down 13.11. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios, I'm Nathan Hager. We are less than 15 minutes away from the opening bell, and futures are pointing to gains after stronger than expected retail sales data for the month of June. We check the markets all day long here at Bloomberg. And right now, S&P futures are up 0.2% or 13 points. Dow futures up 0.4%, a 171-point gain. And NASDAQ futures are higher by 57 points or 0.3%. 10-year Treasuries up 8/32, the yield 4.19%. NYMEX crude down 1.5% at $80.66 per barrel. COMEX gold is up 0.4% at $24.39.90 per ounce. The euro, 1.0873 against the dollar. The yen, 158.72. Bitcoin's down about 0.1%, trading below 64,000. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. I greatly appreciate it. Paul Sweeney's going to bring in our next guest here, but I really want to frame out another time and place where Republicans talk to finance at Wall Street, and that's when you renegotiate and renew your lease with Donald Barron for 585,000 square feet at 1285 Avenue of the Americas. And you know, Paul Sweeney, when you renegotiate your lease 20 years ago in an old another time, you go down to Le Bernardin to celebrate lunch.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's how you were there, what?
Sure.
3 days a week?
Yeah, exactly. Back in the day.
Grano looked at your expense account once and said, "Are you kidding me?"
I was a very, very young...
Why don't you bring in Mr. Grano?
I was a very, very, very young investment banker for Payne Weber back in the day at 1285 6th Avenue. Good memories there. Joe Grano, CEO of Centurion Holdings, joins us here. Joe, you know, I'd love to get your thoughts on these markets here as it relates to this political backdrop we have. We have the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. We had an attempted assassination of a former president. Yet the stock market, it just continues to go higher. How do you put that all together, thinking about these markets in an election year?
Well, I've been wrong because I think the market is overextended. And the divisiveness in the country, not only from a political perspective, but even a financial perspective, is very concerning. You got a lot of event risk. You got a national debt of $34.6 trillion. Put that in perspective, in 2004, it was roughly $7.4 trillion. So you've got Russia, Ukraine, you got China, Taiwan, and you've got the divisiveness in the United States. And an S&P PE ratio, that's almost at a historical high. So I think we're due for a correction, frankly, but it's been climbing a wall of worry. There's no question about it.
And Joe, I think a lot of people share your concerns here. And again, we've got geopolitical risk and domestic political issues, as you mentioned. What do you tell clients here? Do you tell people to take money off the table? Do you try to hedge out some of this risk? Do you just go buy 2-year treasuries and get 4.5%? How do you think about that?
Well, look, there's nothing more safe than, let's call it, a treasury bond or bill. And at a 4.5% to 5% yield with an inverted yield curve up until now, I do think that putting some money in a safety bucket at 4 to 5% interest rate is very prudent. I would say that you need to restructure your portfolio because the S&P has been driven by that magnificent 7, and that's not really sustainable in my opinion either. So I think you start going to dividend yielding stocks, some treasury. You mentioned the record level of gold. I've been telling people for the last 2 years you should be doing gold and silver as a 5 to 10% hedge. Silver, by the way, gold generally trades at 45 times silver. So silver is underpriced, in my opinion. At any rate, they've both done very well here. And I think you just have to be a little more conservative and expect a 10 to 20% correction before it's over.
Joe Grano, I really want to ask about the gentleman from New York, Donald Trump, who I think now is a gentleman from Florida. And he is, I think, in some way melded Wall Street and Main Street. Certainly did that with Mnuchin. But we have a VP pick who flat out distrusts people ensconced on the Avenue of the Americas or Fifth Avenue. How does the Wall Street of Donald Marin and Joe Grano, how does the Wall Street of James Dimon make peace with a second-term Trump-Vance presidency?
I don't think we're given a choice. number one. I think right now Trump has immense amount of momentum, and the assassination attempt, frankly, is going to also solidify his sympathy vote. So I think he's in very good stead. And the selection of Vance is going to be okay with the youth of the country. My personal opinion was that I would have liked to see him pick Nikki Haley, because I think her foreign affairs experience with the United Nations, et cetera, is very good. And plus, I think it's time for a woman. Men have not done a very good job running the country in the last 20 years. So I'm a little bit disappointed in that perspective, but I think you can't discount Trump's marketing capabilities. He is a phenomenal promoter. I don't enjoy the rhetoric on either side. I think it's too divisive, but it looks to me like there's not much choice here. It's going to happen, and now you need to get in line. I heard earlier on your program talking about perhaps a new Treasury Secretary. I think if you could convince Jamie Dimon to do it, it'd be great for the country, because I think he's right now the best executive on the street. So,
Joe, how would you, in fact, get in line or suggest, when you chat with folks, that they prepare perhaps for a second Trump presidency?
Well, when you say prepare, I mean, the legislative agenda is not in the hands of Wall Street. You're watching now some of the most affluent people on the street now supporting Trump in terms of writing checks. So I think that they've come to the given reality that he's more than likely going to win. And now the question is, what's the second term Trump like? I mean, if he really is smart here, he moves from this divisive rhetoric and moves to a unified message and picks the appropriate cabinet members. I mean, Trump suffers from, a position where he doesn't really want anyone around him perceived as smarter than he is, which is an Achilles heel. But, there's plenty of talent around if he just taps it right. And I'm just very hopeful he does. I've had dealings with him when I was chairman of UBS, Payne Weber in the United States, and he is very self-centered. There's no question about it. But I hope to hell that he's smart enough to surround himself with some experienced people here.
Joe Grano, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Always and forever with Payne Weber. No other way to put it. Huge response on YouTube, the live chat. People from Payne Weber Boston, Payne Weber this, Payne Weber that. It was really a force of nature. And UBS handled it. I mean, they carried the Payne Weber name for a long number of years before it.
And they're still in that building, 1285 Avenue of the Americas. So we were there on the trading floor, the 9th floor there. That was good. So we had some good years there.
Yeah, what you're saying is you were next to 5 places with fancy lunches.
Exactly. And we tried to order, we worked all night, every single night, so we ordered in from just about everywhere.
Mike sends me a memo, goes, Tom, we just love what you do. We want to give you a window seat. And I'm like, Mr. Bloomberg, thank you. Yeah. That's great. A window. We're going to put you near Caroline Hyde, and, that's great. And I look out, and I got a view, folks, for those of you worldwide, of Restaurant Row. You look down 3rd Avenue, and there it is. McDonald's is right there. Thank you, Mike Bloomberg, for the wonderful view of McDonald's and Restaurant Row on 3rd Avenue. You're over there at Payne Weber, Le Bernadette.
Some good days.
La Guigny.
You betcha.
Something Daniel Boulud is doing. I could see it. Those were the days.
Those were the days.
Futures up 13. It's a night lift today, Paul. And, as Joe Grano said, I mean, I'm sorry, every morning there's a bid coming in.
There's a bid coming in
That's
here.
how I think this works.
Yeah. I mean, we got the S&P up about 13 points. The Dow up 170 points. That's 0.4%. The NASDAQ up as well. Yields coming in. We got the 10-year Treasury, Tom, off about 3 basis points, about 4.19%, 4.45% on that 2-year Treasury. I'm going to call that WTI crude oil just because we're down about 1.8%, sitting right above $80 a barrel, so still in that trading range, Tom. But you called out gold up $12 here, $2,440 per ounce.
David Rosenberg publishes in Toronto on retail sales. Equities love it, bonds not a bit. Retail sales posted a big upside surprise, according to Mr. Rosenberg. Futures up 14, the VIX 13.10. VIX coming in this morning. We need to get the markets open. Stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And from the Interactive Brokers Studios, the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, I'm Nathan Hager. We are seconds away from the opening bell. There it is on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And at the open, stocks are trading close to records. We do check the markets for you all day long on Bloomberg. And looking at the S&P 500 right now, it is trading about 0.25% higher at 56.31. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, I'll be honest with you, the indexes are not populating on my screen right now, so we'll continue to watch.
You're killing it, Nathan.
I know, right? That's the way things
we
go
know a
sometimes. We'll see if you got it.
We got it. Yeah, lift to the market here.
Yeah.
You know, Dow up 208 points. VIX 13.10. You got anything else to say?
Well, I can tell you that the 10-year Treasury yield is down to 4.19%. The 2 years at 4.45. I'll get my my worksheet screen unfrozen. Get back to you. I can tell you that United Health shares are their highest level in 6 months after results that beat estimates, though a key measure of the insurer's medical costs were higher than expected. I'll toss it back to you guys, see if I can get my screen.
You know,
That's
Nathan, Paul and I are tearing up
Paul.
over your work today. I mean, the star of Bloomberg Daybreak. And so, you know, I just want you to wander out New York Avenue, 2228. Paul got off the phone with McDonald's out there.
Yep.
We'd like to get you lunch at McDonald's, you know, out New York Avenue further today. It's like, it's on the way to Maryland or something like that. Nathan Hager, thank you so much. This is a really important conversation because he has the one volume book where you go, how did we get here? And the answer is nobody got us here with one volume like Chris Whalen. And he joins us right now in a massive rewrite of his classic Inflated. And I've been livid about the lack of historical analysis of this grim assassination attempt. And nobody's done the one volume history of our finance like Chris Whalen. He joins us in our studio today. Page 146 of your book is the analog of the pandemic of 1919 and what all of our grandparents said was the Roaring 20s.
That's right.
Are these the Roaring 20s right now?
I think in many ways it is a repeat of the 20s. We have deflation in commercial real estate instead of the farm sector, but we have a boom on Wall Street because there's not much else going on. And Americans always manage to, you know, find their way to the securities markets when everything else
But that analog ended.
Yes, it did.
Where is our 1929 out there somewhere?
No, I think, as my friend Stan Middleman says in the biography I'm coming out with in September, 2028 will be the maxi reset in housing after 12, 13 years of going up. You know, we run out of buyers at a certain point. It won't be a supply side function this time that just brings more homes in, as we saw before. That won't be the issue. It'll just be people unable to buy them because they're so expensive.
Well, affordability today is an issue. I hear that from real estate folks across the board here, and there's not a lot of supply. And
this is the cost of quantitative easing. It solved a lot of problems at the time. We were allowed to fund forbearance for borrowers and renters in this country for 2 years by stealing from Peter to pay Paul. But now we pay for it.
All right. I've been around the block once or twice here. I've been hearing about, reading about deficits, our national debt forever. I'm starting to hear about it a little bit more from economists, from politicians. Where is that on your radar screen of we got to deal with these things at some point?
Well, a lot of people ask me that question, and what I tell people is that the United States has a lot of collateral. So when you throw $35 trillion at me, on the one hand, I worry because it shows a lack of discipline on the part of our society. We can't borrow from our children forever. We have to stop. Thomas Jefferson addressed that very specifically. But on the other hand, Jim Pinkerton said to me the other day that energy in this country is worth $175 trillion. So should we worry? No. But this country has the income and the assets and, most importantly, the people to fix it. So we can fix it.
If we get a Trump-Vance presidency, and without question there, I mean, no, excuse me, the legislative branch could block, but we get a reaffirmation or an enhancement even of what I'm going to call the Trump tax cuts of a number of years ago. Do we have an analog of that in your book, Inflated? Is there a point where we legislated a good outcome for the elites versus the rest of America, like we seem to be in process of doing?
Really, from Nixon on. Nixon didn't take us off gold. He just closed the window. FDR took us off gold. But what he did was he enshrined deficit spending. And from that point on, we didn't look back.
So your Gilded Age is a lot wider than the modern perception of it.
Yes, because it's a function of war. It's a function of the hubris of a society that triumphed over fascism, used production to do it, by the way. We outproduced them. We didn't outbuild them and fight them. We outproduced them. And so today, here we are, the most prosperous nation in the world. Remember Humphrey Hawkins? We thought we could legislate economic outcomes. It reminds me of Tolkien and the earlier parts of The Lord of the Rings, when the men thought that they could become immortal and got into big trouble. So, this is a maturation process. Because remember, 100 years ago, most people in this country had never been 10 miles from their birthplace. This country didn't know about things like debt and foreign wars. Today, we are the Roman Empire redux.
So, there's a million ways to go from that, but the one near-term issue that I think people are concerned about, at least I'm just thinking about the banks reporting over the last several days, is when and if is commercial real estate going to become an issue for the banks and for this economy? Because it seems like it's been several years now, and I didn't hear JP Morgan talk about it too much. I didn't hear Bank of America talk about it too much.
And to layer onto that, Chris, every conversation we have with CRE pros is a rationalization of, everything else is doing fine except what Paul's talking about.
No, it's chop salad. Every asset is different. That's why you don't see it hitting the media narrative, because it involves institutional investors, pension funds, everybody else who don't have a lot of political sympathy, let's be fair. We worry about consumers. We don't worry about landlords. So the landlords took a kicking during COVID, and here they are, and they don't have the cash to hang on to these buildings now that all of a sudden financing rates are back 7, 8, 9% for 7-year money, okay? We were financing these things at 2%, Tom, at cap rates of 1. Obviously, that was not going to be sustainable.
So is this something that there is a shoe to drop?
Yes,
Is it? And
but
is it for the...
it's quietly dropping.
Okay.
Shoes dropping. Think of little shoes, REITs, private developers, people you don't normally read about. If you want to hear about this, read The Real Deal. In fact, I'm surprised Bloomberg hasn't made them an offer. They're having such fun at The Real Deal, covering this value destruction. Because remember,
it's amazing. Every day there's a story.
They can't cover 10% of them. And remember, these assets went up for a century. When I rated the small banks here in New York, they'd never seen a default.
A very famous real estate guy, folks, in New York said to me, "You don't understand, Tom, these are family stories."
Totally.
And these families that are 3, 4 generations, and they want a cash call, and they're like, "We can't make it, or we don't want to make it, whatever."
Well, what was the most chilling thing I read the last week or so? When the head of Related decided to carve out his Florida business, which he will run, and he's stepping away from the big company.
Look what he did with the Dolphins, Steve Ross.
No, he's one of the smartest guys in the business, but he has some assets that are great. And so the west side, Camden, the rail yards on the west side now.
I got to get this in. Michael Barr's in here, so we got to cut it short. But Chris Whalen, this is too important. I have a chart which is normalized back to August of 2007 of 6 big banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and 4 others. Though Citigroup is not a big bank anymore. It just hasn't recovered. How do you perceive Citigroup versus JP Morgan and Bank of America?
Well, they're a top 5 money center bank because of the payments platform. But you're right, they have pulled back. There was a time when Citi was the biggest derivative shop in the industry. You know who it is now? Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley and Goldman now lead that parade.
Where do you perceive Citigroup in 5 years?
Merged with somebody else, maybe with a big asset management business, maybe Schwab. But that's what they're missing right now. They sold that to Morgan Stanley with the Smith-Barney transaction. They don't have the asset manager to make them look like everybody else. And they're still, Fraser has done enormous work there in terms of getting their expenses in line, but she still has to cut 5 points out of their efficiency ratio before she can even talk about Jamie Dimon. That's the high bar he has set.
10 seconds, who would buy them? Who's lined up to be the one to fold in Citigroup and their international
I keep saying they should merge with Goldman. Let Citibank run credit.
Okay.
Let the Goldman boys run deals. Because Goldman cannot run credit to save their lives. They're getting a kicking every quarter in credit.
Now, this is the Chris Whalen we know. After a beverage of his choice, he's like this. Chris Whalen, thank you so much. We
Have a
wait for
great
the
day.
second edition of Inflated. The movie rights have been sold. It's going to be interesting to see, to say the least. The Dow up 226 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom Paul. Day 2 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee today. Republican delegates vigorously cheered their party's standard bearer on the first night. Donald Trump was named the party's presidential nominee. The JD Vance vice presidential pick for the GOP ticket is being cheered in a portion of Silicon Valley. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports from San Francisco.
Much of the area here has been a liberal bastion, a Democratic stronghold. But recently, a louder voice is being heard here in the Valley, that of smaller tech and venture capital. Vance has been there. And today, some in tech cheering one of their own closer to the Oval Office. Elon Musk saying, great choice. David Sachs calling Vance an American patriot. Peter Thiel, who has had his on and off relationship, cheering the pick. And of course, the GOP hope is that some of these techies will pony up when it comes to financial support. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Rapper and model Amber Rose took the stage at the first night of the RNC. The entertainer echoed what other speakers talked about, the struggle with high cost of living and inflation in America.
But I'm here tonight to tell you, no matter your political background, that the best chance we have to give our babies a better life is to elect Donald Trump President of the United States.
Speaking tonight, former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley. As for President Biden, he's now saying it was a mistake to say he wanted to put a bullseye on Donald Trump. But in an NBC News interview with Lester Holt, the president says his opponent's rhetoric has been more incendiary.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said I want to be a dictator on day one.
President Biden also tells NBC's Lester Holt he plans to debate former President Trump again in September. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom and Paul.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. The three of us have to have a meeting right now. I mean, Nathan Hager's getting fan notes out on live chat on YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we do? I mean, it's too much.
Well, Nathan is always, he's a handsome guy, and, then he gets the fan mail, and, what are you going to do?
I just got a note from the guys at Ben's Chili Bowl on U Street, and they're like, Tom, don't send him out New York Avenue to McDonald's. Send Nathan up to Ben's Chili Bowl. It's 100 degrees out there today.
Oof.
I think that's going to work. Good morning to Ben's Chili Bowl, my favorite, in Washington. And Bloomberg Surveillance, brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor-to-staff ratio, small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technology. And we thank Commonwealth particularly for the economic data coverage they provide us at 8:30. Every morning. Joe Grano was great. He says, look, I've been wrong.
Yep.
There's a bid.
That's
all there is to it.
Bid to the market. And that includes today, Tom, another up a day. The S&P up about a third of 1%, Dow up 0.6%, the NASDAQ up 0.5%. And Tom, the Russell 2000 yet again leading the way up 1.5%. So that broadening out of the market that people like to see.
Logan's out on YouTube saying, free Nathan. It's like, Michael, it says, free Nathan.
It's in his little studio.
He has the best food court of 200 plus offices of Bloomberg. You should see his seats at the Nationals. From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, I'm Nathan Hager, watching stocks trade close to records. We check the markets all day long on Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up 0.4%, up 20 points. 5651 is the S&P level. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.7%, up 287 points. 40,501. And the NASDAQ Composite's up 0.4%, up 69 points, trading at 18,542. The 10-year Treasury is up 6/32, yield down about 2.5 basis points to 4.2%. The 2-year is at 4.46%. NYMEX crude is down 1.5% at $80.68 per barrel. COMEX gold up 0.9%, 24.4970 per ounce. The euro 1.0881 against the dollar. After earnings, Bank of America shares are higher by 3.3%. Morgan Stanley's down about 0.5%. And Match is up nearly 8%, trading at about 34.51. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. This is an important conversation because of his family. David Gura, and I'm not going to go into the details, but his family has an incredible understanding of the fabric of the Midwest through the philosophies of the 19th century. The Gura clan owns the high ground on understanding the culture. I made a joke earlier this morning. I am working on surveillance elegy. We'll see how that goes. But the answer is we have a new vice presidential candidate who talks of Jackson, Kentucky, and coal country. Like most small children, I learned my home address so that if I get lost, I could tell a grown-up where to take me. David Gura joins us right now. Where does JD Vance and his compatriot Donald Trump want to take us?
Well, Donald Trump has always admired JD Vance since JD Vance came to popularity a few years back with the memoir that you mentioned. He was a student at Yale Law School under Amy Chua, who wrote a famous book in her own right, and she encouraged him to tell his own story. So he grew up, as you say, in Kentucky, in rural America, dealing with a long list of difficulties. His dad left the home. His mom was in the grips of drug addiction her entire life. His grandmother raised her with the help of his sister. It was a hard knock childhood, to say the least. And he rose from that, went to the Ohio State University for his undergrad degree, wound up at Yale Law, and the rest is history, as they say. He was welcomed by a lot of what you would call elite America. That includes investors, politicians. After Trump's election in 2016, he was seen as somebody who could kind of guide people who were flummoxed by that result, couldn't understand it, through it, because he had a foot in both of these worlds. And going back to what I said a few minutes ago, Donald Trump has admired the way that he's done that. And even though, and this will come out in the coming days, I'm sure, after the Trump election, we saw a lot of skepticism about Donald Trump from JD Vance before he was a senator. He's apologized for that, really warmed to the rhetoric and the policy positions of the now former president, and that was sufficient. That apology was sufficient to sort of ingratiate him to Donald Trump and get him on the ticket.
The Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Thank you. The convention now in Milwaukee. It seems like President Trump is getting a nice wave of data points supporting him, decisions, whether they're coming legal decisions out of Florida, whether they're coming obviously from surviving an assassination attempt, which is just extraordinary. It seems to be some real positive momentum behind this ticket.
I was watching last night, flicking between that and the home run derby, which my two kids are more interested in than the convention, I must say. And when he came out, and this is something that's kind of radically different. You look back at past conventions, usually it's like a wedding. You don't see the bride until the wedding itself. But Donald Trump has turned that on its head. He was there last night. It's likely he'll be there every night of this convention. But he came out to the adulation of that crowd. There were tears in the audience, members of his family, other delegates who were there. And he wasn't fulminating. He didn't speak. We didn't hear him say anything during the course of those proceedings last night. But he kind of soaked it all in. And I think you're right, Paul. It was such a frightening and sobering event that took place on Saturday. And to see him there with that bandage, I think, was shocking and inspirational and difficult, I assume, for a lot of the folks in that room. And he was there wearing a red tie, JD Vance with a blue tie, sitting in that box watching it all unfold.
Now, I think probably one of the main questions is what type of speech will Donald Trump give on Thursday? Is he a changed man? Has this experience from Saturday changed him in any way? Will we see that in his rhetoric? I guess that's people will be tuning to see.
Yeah, and you asked that first question, which you've heard so many times during the course of his presidency, campaign before that, and afterward. Will he be a changed man? And what we've heard from the campaign is that the message here is unity. There have been some glimpses of that since that attack on Saturday. We'll see if that comes into the speech. But going back to what you said a moment ago, Paul, he's kind of riding high at this moment. He was doing well in the polls before that attack on Saturday. This has kind of changed the political terrain a lot. We'll see if he takes advantage of that in the speech on Thursday.
They're in Milwaukee.
They are.
Okay. My grandfather's middle name was Emerson. And we tried to effort Philip Gurr today, and his people said he just can't talk. He's just not going to do it.
Summer for an academic is a busy time of year.
The summer for Philip Gurr, unlike his son, checked out. And within Philip Gurr's absolutely classic transcendentalism, which is everything Donald Trump wants to capture in Milwaukee, they talk about Emersonian self-reliance. That's what we're going to hear, maybe even from Nikki Haley tonight or that. How does Donald Trump, with all of his foibles, capture that Midwest theology that Senator Vance wrote about? How do they capture that for the rest of the nation that's not part of it, that's not part of MAGA?
There's been a lot of writing about the approach of this campaign this time around. Susie Wiles is running it. This is a very professional campaign compared to it. She's the campaign chair for Donald Trump's reelection campaign. This is a different campaign than we saw in 2020 and 2016. He's very focused. They're keeping him very focused. They're sticking to core messaging. That has proven to be very effective. They are impressing upon him, the candidate, that he needs to keep doing that going forward. I think as a result of that, you don't see him making the kind of overtures that he made in the past to what we would call the old guard of the Republican Party. He is really trying to hammer home his message to the people that you're talking about, Tom. That is people in the Midwest, people who are disaffected. That is percolating through all of the speeches that we've heard. I mean, there is some irony there that David Sachs, this multimillionaire venture capitalist who's a big backer of JD Vance, was speaking there last night talking about this phenomenon. But it's no longer an outreach to Wall Street, an outreach to traditional Republicans. It is elevating this kind of grievance and disaffectedness, and what we've seen over the course of this campaign is so far that's been very successful.
But the thing about Susie Wiles is she's a moderate. She's not really a Trump person, so he's gone out and hired her to get the votes of Nikki Haley. Discuss.
That is the speech, you know, Paul's bringing up what we're going to hear on Thursday night. I think that this speech, which is a surprise speech from the former governor, former UN ambassador, is the one that I'm most interested in a way. We saw so many people in finance on Wall Street gravitating to her in the primary, pinning their hopes to her, thinking that her wagon was going to take them to the White House. That didn't happen. Just as we've tracked the changing rhetoric of JD Vance, we've tracked the changing rhetoric of Nikki Haley as well. She's somebody who also found Donald Trump distasteful. Suddenly she doesn't again. I think it's an open question, sort of what she says about him, her sense of him, and how she talks to voters tonight in that speech. There is we've talked a lot about how the undecided vote, the sliver of undecided voters is very small, but there also is an interest here in getting the Republican Party together and cohesive. Nikki Haley plays a key role in doing that, Tom, and we'll see how she goes about doing that in her speech tonight in Milwaukee.
David Gurr, thank you so much. I'll get out on Amazon Gurr Senior's book. It's absolutely
You should have checked the faculty pool.
Just call the pool. The movie rights. I mean, the movie rights put you through Cornell,
That's
right?
Yeah. Everybody's all about the transcendental.
David Gurr, thank you so much. A little bit of Midwest theology there with David Gurr, of course, the big take. And part of that is, you know, the theology. We're going to hear it from Nashville tonight. Yeah, you know, I mean, it's a very Nashville country music kind of. We played Ted Nugent earlier.
Yeah, we covered that.
On that. Yep. Cat Scratch Fever. The bass player in this song defines the Midwest. Nobody knows who Glenn Worf is. He is the definitive modern Nashville bass player. And he's out of Madison, Wisconsin.
Boom.
Which is how you do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all Wisconsin today. We've really timed this out nice. You know, it's great. And we're going to have our continuing coverage. Joe Matthew, Kaylee Lyons, Balance of Power from Milwaukee. Stay with us on that. Brooks and Dunn.